presenters go ahead and start presenting, because we want to make sure that there's no feedback. So yeah, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Kihano, who is our Master of Ceremonies for today, and he'll go ahead and explain how we're gonna do things today. Kihano?
All right. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Johansen Quijano, and I will be your host for this second North Texas Gaming Symposium. We had
Kihano,
to.
you may be muted.
Oh, yay!
You have
There?
that on your bingo card. Mark it down. Yes, we can hear you
Yeah,
now.
for sure. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Johansen Quijano, and I will be your host for this second North Texas Gaming Symposium, part of a 3-event series, which includes the Gaming for Change tournament, which was originally going to be held tomorrow and has now been postponed to March, and the second North Texas Narrative Game Jam, which I will post a link in the chat later. First, I'd like to thank some of the key players in helping us put this event together. First, Dr. Sean Madison, the president from Trinity River, and Dr. Thomas Mills, the VPAA, for their support. I would also like to thank our deans, Dr. Amy Gilley, Dr. Anand Ramaswamy, and Mr. Richard Chance, for their support and help in funding the event. I would also like to thank our amazing admins, Dr. Jeanette Laredo, Ms. Marcia Philistine, and Yolanda Falsner, in helping us with the logistics, including setting up the website, the teams, and the really quick pivot that we had to do to move from the originally planned face-to-face conference into what we are now doing online. And of course, the members of the planning committee from institutions from all over North Texas, including Dr. Wendi Sierra, who will be presenting shortly, Dr. Jason Helms, Brad Tussle, Nick Bontinger, Jeanette Laredo, Richard Chance, Matthew Morrison, Eugene Fryer, and Andrew Latham. So for our first talk, we will be hearing from Dr. Wendi Sierra. She is a PhD in communication, rhetoric, and digital media, who is currently an assistant professor, or did you get associate assistant? Right. Assistant professor at TCU. She is one of the few titled game studies faculty, like an actual assistant professor of game studies in the United States, and she will be sharing her work in a presentation titled Tomahawks and Warpaint, Preserving the History of Native Representation in Gaming. Dr. Sierra, the floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let me get my PowerPoint up. Here we go. So thank you for that introduction. As you can probably tell from the title, we're going to be talking about representation and Native Americans as it relates to gaming. So this is a quick overview of the talk and where it's going to go. We'll start with some background information on representation, why it matters, what it looks like in other media. We'll move on to the Turtle Island Game Collection, which is being developed at TCU. We'll talk specifically about some of the challenges in preserving and finding things to archive, and then we'll look a little bit at my data, which right now covers 1980 to 1999, which is a very wacky era in gaming's history, as we'll see. So the image on the screen that you have right there is, from what I can tell and from my research, the first Native American main character in a game, and this is Wampum, which is made by Jelco for the NES. One of the really interesting things about Wampum is that it is actually a reskin of a game that was originally released in Japan and about the Monkey King. So if you're familiar at all with gaming's histories, this is sort of similar to a Super Mario Bros. 2 situation, where the Japanese version has an entirely different story and visual aesthetic, but the main gameplay loops, the mechanics, things like that are the same. So they made the main character a Native American brave. The environments still basically look like they did in the original game. You definitely don't get the feeling that you're traveling through early America when you play this game. But it is kind of cool as the first. All right, so why representation matters, and I want to split this up into why it matters for outsiders and why it matters for insiders. I'm going to kind of speed through this topic quickly so we can get to the games, but by all means, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. So the main idea here is that as people, we draw on familiar information when we're trying to think about a particular social group. Now, if we're very familiar, we have lots of day-to-day experiences with a certain social group, say like me and academics. I'm an academic, most of my friends are academics, I see them every day. Media representations have less of an impact on me because I'm balancing those against my real-world experiences. But if I had no contact with academics, say I had never been to college, didn't know any academics, wasn't friends with any academics, then media representations would potentially have a much stronger impact on me because that would be the information most readily available to me when I think about that group. I do want to highlight right here, so I was going to do some call and answer type stuff when we were in person. I'll just skim over it quickly. Obviously, this is Dances with Wolves, for those of us that are familiar with it. And I want to highlight that Graham Greene, who is the native character right there, is Oneida, which is my tribe. So go home team. So if we're drawing on our media representations to help us think about a particular group, this can be incredibly problematic if most of those media representations are bad. Again, I won't repeat this. I was going to ask everybody a show of hands if we were in person, but when I've taught classes on this issue, I've asked students, how many of you could name at least 5 Native Americans that you have personally had more than one conversation with? And very few of them are able to even name 5 people that they know personally, which suggests that these media representations are incredibly important. So some of the problems in contemporary media representation. First of all, most Native characters are only seen in historical pieces. So if you think of some of these big movies, right, we've got Pocahontas, we've got Lone Ranger, Dances with Wolves, The Last of the Mohicans. These are all set either in the Old West or sort of in the colonial period. They're not modern. We don't see Native peoples in contemporary situations. Often they fall into a couple key tropes. So the noble savage trope really could apply to basically any of those characters in those movies I just listed. But essentially it's this real backhanded compliment, right? Like, Native people are noble because they're so close to the earth and in tune with the environment. At the same time, they're savages because they are not civilized from a Western European sense of the word, and therefore they could never survive modernization. This basically like describes the whole story of Dances with the Wolves there. Often you will see a magical Indian trope. So Pocahontas is a good example of this. And it's related to that noble savage idea, right? Native Americans are so close to the earth that they somehow have magical powers. They paint with the colors of the wind. They communicate with trees. Maybe they go on spirit visions. Often these are bit characters in larger stories. So pretty sure Buffy had a Native American shaman in one part of the story. Supernatural has done this, right? A magical Indian character who pops in just for a little bit. Think of like all the horror movies that are based on disturbing a Native American burial ground, right? Then when we do see Native characters in contemporary environments, it is often associated with this idea of inauthenticity. So that noble savage, that magical Indian was part of a beautiful, once pure culture that has now been diluted, right? This Family Guy image right here is a great example of this. Not that I'm expecting beautiful, ethical representation of Family Guy, but in this episode, they really sort of highlight this trope. So these casino Indians have become so focused on money that they have lost the purity of their once noble culture, right? So if this is all that we have to draw on, if this is all that most people can think of when they think of Native Americans as a population, we have a real problem here. For insiders, the issues with representation are a little different, although they're very related. I want to highlight real quick Modern Warrior up there. So this is Lance Suse, who is a Dene or Navajo TikToker. I want to say I just checked the other night. He's at something like 3.2 million views. And he starts a lot of his videos off with "Hey colonizer," and has become popular presenting Native issues from an Indigenous perspective on TikTok. So I just highlight him as somebody in the media spotlight right now as a contemporary Native American. So for insiders, some of the important stuff, more than other social groups, Native Americans are seen and thus can begin to learn to see themselves through these negative stereotypes. One critical potential impact of this is the homogenization of culture. So among the 571 recognized tribes in America, there's a wide variety of different cultures, different symbols, different beliefs. And yet in most media representation, that gets flattened to like a headband with a feather in it, a vest for some reason, and a few fairly stereotypical things that may or not actually be appropriate for any particular individual Native culture. Additionally, there can be a problem of self-stereotyping as they see these messages repeated in media. Of course, even that repeated point is kind of a problem, because in general, Native American characters are really underrepresented in all media. So as of the 2020 census, Native Americans constitute about 3% of the US population. Historically, Native Americans have been the most undercounted group in the census. You can kind of understand why Native Americans might not want to respond to the US Census historically. And so we should consider that a floor, right? Like there are at least 3%. However, in media, across all media, Native American characters account for less than 1% of characters. So less than 0.5% in film and TV, less than 1% of children's cartoon characters, less like 0.09% of video game characters, right? So we're just struck by this shocking lack of representation across the board. I highlight over here Rutherford Falls, which has 50% of the writing room Native American and a number of Native American actors, including Michael Gray Eyes here, which is on Peacock. So this is a sort of a counter to both the representation in terms of the characters and in terms of the creators, which is pretty cool. So this is another slide that, were we in person, I was going to sort of quiz you a little bit and ask you to think about what the differences might be between the things on the left side of the screen and the things on the right side of the screen. Since we are in teams, I'll give you a moment to think about that, and then I'll tell you the answer. So there's one thing that makes all of the things on the left side similar and all of the things on the right side similar.
And you can definitely put your thoughts in the chat as well.
Oh yeah. Add them in the chat. And in just a second, I'm gonna ask you some brainstorming questions that would be great to put in the chat. Definitely not reading the chat while I'm presenting, but I promise I'll look later.
That's okay. I'll bring up any questions if they pop up.
Cool. So the right side are all things that were created by Native people or with substantial Native involvement. And the right side were things that were generally created without Native involvement. And if you look between the two, you can see some differences in how the characters are represented. On the right side, we see, first of all, a lot more variety, I would argue, in the situations that the characters are in. We also see a lot more contemporary representations, whereas the left side is a lot more historical representations, a lot more stereotypical representations. But of course, we're here for the North Texas Gaming Symposium, not the North Texas all other kinds of media symposium. So let's take these ideas and turn it to gaming. Now, I've given you a quick primer in some of my classes. The material that we just covered takes 3 to 4 weeks to get across, so you got the 12-minute version. But with that as a background, I want you to make some predictions. And these would be great to put in the chat and to hear what other people are thinking about. So the first question I have for you is, how many games can you think of with a Native American character? So this could be a main character, one in a cast of characters, an NPC. But I'm curious how many games you guys can come up with right away. And then related to that, how common do you think they are? So, how would this question be different if I asked you how many Asian characters, how many female characters, how many white characters? Are they more common? Are they less common? I'm also curious if you can think of certain genres where you're identifying native characters as being more common. And maybe this could be a factor of why you can think of many characters or few characters, right? And then finally, with these games that you're thinking of in your head, I wonder if you see any of the trends that I've briefly mentioned previously. So think about these questions, hold them in your head. We're going to come back to them as I turn to look at games from 1980 to 1999, and I'll give you some of the answers for the games in that period. So I want to talk briefly about the Turtle Island Games collection that I am developing at TCU. And one of the big ideas behind this collection is that Indigenous representation in games is understudied. Now, representation in games is generally understudied, as games is a new field. Indigenous representation particularly so. And in part, this is due to the challenges that I'll talk about in just a little bit. But seeing this, I have decided to put together both an on-site and an online collection that's going to help in the study of Native representation. So we get that cash money from the John V. Roach Honors College at TCU that's going toward purchasing materials that are going to be in our collection. We've got support from the library to archive and, as needed, make accessible both the games and all this paratext that's going around the collection. So game manuals, comics, art books when they're available, game guides, strategy guides. We're starting to collect magazines, game informers, things like that. Anything that can help build the story of what does Native representation look like in gaming. And our audience for this is instructors, students, and other researchers. So the basic idea is that if we make this stuff easier to find, easier to access, and easier to play, more professors will want to teach about it, more students will want to do class projects about it, and more researchers will want to work on it. So in our on-site collection, this is where our cash is going, right? We have games right now. I think the oldest game that we have is the Commodore 64 game. We go all the way up through the last console generation, so PS4, Switch, Xbox One. We are in the process of purchasing the new consoles, and at that point, obviously, we'll expand to the newer ones. So the current and last generation games that we own are available for checkout by students and faculty. The thought being that if anything should happen to these, they should get lost, damaged, etc. It's fairly easy to replace them. It's not expensive and the games are findable. Our older games, our Commodore 64 games, our NES games, SNES, we have a Sega Genesis game, There is a Jaguar game on my list, but we have not purchased it yet. We do have a ZX Spectrum game. These are not checkoutable by students or faculty. Many of them are actually quite expensive, and they're hard to come by. So there's a concern that if anything happened, we would not be able to replace them. But they are playable in the library. So students can come into the library, faculty can assign gameplay time in the library for people to come and look at these games. We also have a Steam account loaded with PC games available for in-library play, so we are not just sharing that Steam library access with anybody on the street, but if you actually come into the Fab Lab, you're able to play some of those games. And finally, we have a Switch available for checkout, and that was pretty important, and again, helping to ensure access. Helping to make sure that our students and our faculty are able to play these games and to actually do some good work with them. We're also in the process of building an online collection. So this website will be a searchable resource that has a lot of game information. And the idea is that this will help expand our reach beyond just the TCU community and can potentially be a really valuable resource for faculty, students, and researchers at other institutions as well. So some information that we're gathering and slowly adding to this website. For every game that we're putting in the site, we're giving developer, publisher information, year of release. We're looking at the systems that a game is released on. We also talk a lot about the indigenous content in the game. So the idea is not to summarize the whole game unless necessary for what we're talking about. It's also not to do your homework for you. So the site does not tell you if a particular game has good representation or bad representation, but rather to tell you where you're going to find the indigenous content and how much indigenous content there is to help audiences make a decision about whether this game is worth their time to look at. We also include gameplay information, and this is because gamer literacy makes a difference in terms of what people are able to access. So as an instructor, I generally have no problem assigning students to play Never Alone, which you see in the bottom corner there. It's available on a whole ton of systems. It's a cute little platformer game. It's fairly simple. Even if you're not already a gamer, I feel confident that you can pick it up and play at least an hour of it, no problem. But Civ 6, which is in the middle, takes a lot of gamer knowledge, and if you're not already familiar with strategy games, you may not actually be able to play this game well enough to get what you need to get to interpret the content. So that gameplay information section is pretty important. And then finally, we include a bunch of additional resources. Research articles, if anyone has published about the game in question, community responses, if a native community has explicitly spoken about a particular game. There are some negative things said from communities about Civ 6, which we see in here, and video introductions when possible from indigenous collaborators and creators. So this all sounds good, and it sounds like, yes, this is a thing that we should have. We put the archive together, we buy the things, we make the website, right? No problem. In reality, lots of problems. So I want to talk about some of the challenges in trying to preserve gaming history. Again, I'm specifically looking at native representation, but some of these challenges apply broadly in general to preserving gaming history. So the first question you can see over there is what counts, right? Like what do we call a game? Do we preserve mobile games? What would that mean? Do I need to buy a Neo Geo? Do I need to get a Razor so that we can play Motorola Razor games? Do we count handheld games? If we can't count handheld games, like what about those Tiger handhelds? Do we count arcade games, right? For this particular question, Indian Battle that you see right there, to my knowledge, is the first game with native characters, released in '80 by Taito. It was just a straight reskin, essentially, of Space Invaders. So instead of aliens coming down on the screen, it's Indian warriors coming down on the screen, and you, the cowboy settler, have to kill them. If we decide that this counts, like, how do we get a CRT TV? Who maintains this? How do we keep it working to a degree that makes us responsible owners of this item, right? So drawing those boundaries becomes important in thinking about what does or doesn't count. Additionally, we got to think about what we can afford, because money is a finite resource, even at TCU. On the screen, you see a game that this is actually just from a couple days ago. If we wanted to buy this NES game with the manual, the box, and the game itself, it would be $650. We got into collecting at the same time, I guess, that literally everyone else got into collecting, because in the past few years, prices, particularly on NES games, but also to a lesser extent SNES, N64, and some of those older systems, have shot through the roof. So we could buy fewer games, but also get the box and the manual. We could buy more games and not get the box and the manual. Now, especially when we're talking about these old games, the manual is often where the story is. So if we don't have the manual, how are we hurting our ability to study things? And then finally, we got to think about what we should prioritize. So this incredibly offensive game that you see right here, Custer's Revenge, was actually made by the maker of a pornographic game company. It is quite notorious, and it's often cited as one of the inciting causes of the industry crash in 1983. So more than Indian Battle or Cowboy Kid, you can find some research on this game. At the same time, it is patently offensive. I would not suggest any of my students play with it. I would not suggest any teachers teach with it. So in terms of having a physical copy, how important is it for us to have access to this game versus to have access to maybe games by native creators? Do we prioritize games that are more popular, thinking that students will be more familiar with them? Do we prioritize, for example, games that are on the Switch because we have a Switch available for checkout? So thinking about these decisions and how we prioritize the finite budget that we have and where we draw the boundaries on this project has been a substantial part of the work that we've done. There's some other access issues that I want to talk about specifically. So first of all, while I've presented this as a reasonably clear and cohesive topic, Native American representation in games, there is absolutely no clear list. There are some lists out there. They are very not comprehensive. There's a lot of obscure titles. I've been studying this for about 2 years, searching for these games and trying to find as many as I can. And as recently as like 3 weeks ago, I ran into 5 more games that I had no idea about, including Elvira 2, Jaws of Cerberus. So that was a fun ride on a Tuesday afternoon. So simply identifying the games that we need to include has been a challenge. On top of that, the age of the games is a challenge for 2 different reasons. First of all, as consumer electronics, many of these things were not made to last, so they are literally degrading in front of us. The plastic is not meant to last. It is crumbling. It is warping. There are bit rot in games. So even if we acquire a game now, thinking about maintaining it for the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years is a serious challenge. On top of that, many of these old games are for systems that are no longer easily accessible. So on screen, we're looking at Apache RAID, which obviously falls into our frame as something that we want to look at. It is on a Commodore 64. I can't read the room to get a sense of how old you are, but I'm guessing many of you may not have seen a Commodore 64 game before. So even after we acquire some of these games, figuring out how we're going to make them playable on library computers working within the bounds of what is allowed by our institution has itself been a challenge. And then there's two specific examples of access issues that I want to talk about. So right here, we have a game that I 100% know exists. We are looking at the front cover and the inside cover of Davy, King of the Wild Frontier, which was released for the Commodore 64. I can find some record of this game. I can find some screenshots of this game. I can find a 2-minute YouTube playthrough of this game, and I can find a really shady website that says that it will allow me to download an executable file that says it is this game.
No.
Now, obviously, I'm not doing that on my nice fancy work computer. I cannot find this game for sale anywhere. I have looked and looked. I'm not sure that a copy exists for sale. If it does exist for sale, I don't know where it is. It was not, as you might guess, a wildly popular game, and so there weren't very many copies to begin with, right? So particularly with the older games, this is one of the big challenges, simply finding them. Even once I know that the game exists, once I know that it's out there, getting a copy to actually play has been a challenge. Now here we have a sort of a flip side of that challenge. So this is Richard. This is a game that came out obviously much more recently, and it was initially available for the PS3 via the PSN and for Steam. The company involved, or the story involves some like weird ancient alien stuff, like the aliens were talking to Native Americans, and there's some Native American language that's the key to unlocking this alien technology. The problem here is that the company that made this game has since gone bankrupt, and it has been delisted from both the PSN and from Steam. And as a more modern game, I am currently not able to find, even on a sketchy website, a playable copy for me to use. So I know that it exists. I can find full playthroughs. I can even find IGN reviews of this game, right? I can find lots of media around this game. But I can't actually get a copy that I can keep in the library, which is a challenge. And honestly, this is part of the purpose for this research. Some of these games are disappearing from sight as we speak. And so if we want to understand the history of representation, we have to start preserving them now. A couple other challenges that I want to talk through quickly that are more qualitative challenges. The collection is called the Turtle Island Game Collection, but what are the boundaries of Turtle Island? Indigenous is a large category that refers to people all over the world. Native American is typically used to refer to the U.S., but what are the borders of Turtle Island, and what do we keep or not keep based on how we define that? Non-human characters is a big question. So I've got a picture of the Tauren from World of Warcraft down there in the corner. They are, I feel, pretty obviously based on Plains Indian spirituality and iconography. Although, interestingly, I just read a research article about a player who was really fascinated by their religion and therefore went to go research Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, our native spirituality is so invisible to you that even in the sight of a Tauren, you go like, maybe Buddhism. Anyway, what about educational games, right? So we've got a screenshot here of Oregon Trail. Where in the world is Carmen Sandiego? It has native characters. But in general, those are very poorly indexed and hard to find information about. So that's potentially a huge challenge if we include them in the database. And then finally, what about indie releases? So this is where a lot of indigenous creators are working. But if you add in itch.io, that opens up a world of things that can be very hard to sort through and find. So how do we draw lines around what we are going to count for the purposes of this database? So I'll just answer quickly. In this research that I'm looking at, I am only looking at things that received a console or computer PC release. I am not looking at educational games. I am not looking at non-human characters. And I'm looking at games with native characters from Mexico to Canada. So those are the borders that I have created. So I want to talk a little bit about some of my research, right? The wacky wild days of the 80s and 90s in gaming. So we're talking about the early PC era, like I've mentioned, Commodore 64, ZX Spectrum, right? All of these computers, the Atari 2600 and its contemporaries, and going up through about PS1, Dreamcast, N64, and DOS, and early Windows 95, 97 games. This is what falls into this portion of the data set. And I'm not sure if this will surprise anyone from, when I asked you to think about those questions earlier, but from 80 to 99, there are a total of 55 games that fall into my data set. 18 of those are fighting games. So overwhelmingly, if a native character appears in a game, that game is likely to be a fighting game. The next highest is action, which is sort of a catch-all genre that includes some wildly different types of games. I almost don't like that as a genre title, but there it is. We have some RPGs that fall into this data set, and I'll talk a little bit about both of those games in a minute. And we have sort of the birth of the FPS genre, which is pretty cool. And we have Turok, Dinosaur Hunter, and its sequels that are classified as FPS games. So some of the trends that I've seen and that I want to share with you from this data set, and I'll highlight when deciding what I'm going to look at for this quantitative analysis, I'm thinking both about how to describe these games as a data set, and I'm also thinking about what are the things that scholars interested in these topics care about. And one of the things that we care about is, are the tribes named? As I mentioned earlier, there's a sort of a homogenization of native cultures that often go on in media. Naming a specific tribe and saying that your character is from a specific tribe doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to give a good ethical representation. And you can see that image of Gunsmoke over there with Chief Devilhawk. So he is, in the game narrative, a Comanche chief that you are going to kill and get $25,000 for. So that's not great representation, but it is a real named tribe. One of the things that you can see here then is that about 60% of the time, games don't name a tribe at all. They mention that a character is native or Indian, but they don't say their nation. Then the remaining 40% is pretty split between fictional tribes and real tribes. I've got an example of a fictional tribe on the other side of the screen down there. This character is said to be from the Micmac tribe, which is very similar to the name of a real tribe that was in the area that the game is set in, but it is spelled differently. In this game, the Micmac tribe is worshiping the old gods and trying to summon Cthulhu, which is what's going on with the character's arm right there. So again, not particularly great representation going on. Most named tribes in this part of the data set were Apache, with Comanche, Navajo, and Sioux slightly lower. One of the things that actually surprised me quite a bit when I was looking at this data set is how many of these games are set in contemporary times. So I defined set in the present as within 30 years of the game's release, so on either side, with the idea that the purpose of looking at this is to think about whether native peoples are shown as contemporary or not. And so something like Metal Gear Solid, technically set, I want to say 15 years in the future from when the game released, still very much reads as contemporary versus reading as futuristic, right? So that's sort of the criteria that I was going for there. And then I have that other category, if there's a non-Earth timeline, if there's time travel involved, those things got coded as other. Now, what I want to highlight here is that we have 18 fighting games, and those are pretty much exclusively set in contemporary times. If you knock out those 18 fighting games, that knocks our set in the present down to 8. And it means that present day games make up 16% of the remaining total versus here where they make up almost half of the total. So the fighting games are sort of dragging the data in a particular direction, which I think is very interesting. Here are just some examples of other time periods. Obviously, you can imagine what the historical games looked like or what the present day games looked like. Shadowrun is a futuristic RPG from 1993, set in a future where magic has returned to the world, and native peoples control a substantial part of the northwestern U.S. And so in the Amerindian lands, you have a major quest that you go do. Worlds of Ultima Savage Empire got coded as other because it involves a sort of alternate timeline Earth where there is a tribe that was related to the Sioux but different. So that's an example of other in the data set. This was also something that surprised me a little bit. I was not expecting to see so many playable characters in these 55 games. So we have 8 games that have a single customizable player, uncustomizable, player character who is native. That surprised me a lot. 23 games where there is a native character among the cast of characters you can pick from. Again, most of these are the fighting games, and the RPGs make up a good chunk of the rest. A friendly NPC in my coding system is a non-player character that you never have to fight, whereas an unfriendly NPC is a non-player character that you do at some point have to fight, even if they become your friend later. So I saw a whole ton of boss fights where you fight a Native American boss, and then at the end, he respects your courage or your strength, and he gives you a key or a password or something like that. You'll notice this adds up to more than 55 because some games had many, right? They had friendly and unfriendly NPCs, or they had a main character and they had unfriendly NPCs. So games could be counted multiple times in here for any type of character that they showed. I coded for gender only looking at if there was a main character or a cast of characters. So I was not going to track through every NPC and every of these 55 games to check the gender split. So this only refers to main character games. This doesn't surprise me, knowing what I know about games and main characters in games. But what I want to highlight here is that of those 6 female characters, 4 of those games are Tekken 1, Tekken 2, Tekken 3, and Tekken Tag Tournament. The only games with a female playable character that are not Tekken are Disney's Pocahontas and Shadowrun, which has a Native American woman that you can add to your party. Character home, I was looking at to see how often really that split between traditional and urban is what I was curious, because this is sort of another signifier of whether Native peoples are seen as contemporary or not. And you can see rarely are Native peoples found in urban settings. Most often, the home or home community of the Native character is never seen, talked about, or depicted. When it is seen or talked about or depicted, it is often a traditional settlement of some sort. I looked at the use of native languages. If anybody's familiar with Assassin's Creed 3, you'll know that this is something that comes up more in the more recent games. In this data set, there was only one game that used native language. That game was Pocahontas, and there was a single word when her father welcomes her. He says hello in the native language. So that was all that was found there. So next steps for this research. Obviously, I am moving on to games from 2000 to 2020. And I'm very interested to see if we see any changes from what has already been presented. So these are just a few of the games on my list. This is what my sheet looks like. And you can see I do have plans to additionally code sales data. I'm very curious if I add a weighting element to this data set, will that change how playable characters look? And I'm also interested to add RSB, ESRB as well for games after the ESRB is developed to look at if these characters appear in any specific rating of games. So where does this leave us? Wrapping up quick to save at least a little bit of room for questions. Essentially, studying representation is obviously very important, but it's also very hard. One of the big things that I hope that I've shown is that there are a lot of choices that you have to make when you do this type of work. And you just have to make those choices to the best of your ability and try to be clear on why you're making those choices. So when I do this work, I'm grounding my decisions in the native scholars that I follow, the community values, and what I think will be most useful for us. And then I just want to leave you with one of the games in this data set called Werewolf the Last Warrior, which is really, really weird. It's just a weird game. So with that, I will open it up for questions.
You can definitely put your questions in the chat, or you can unmute yourself to ask a question.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I'll answer the educational games question first. Ultimately, I decided to exclude educational games, and for this data set to explicitly focus on commercial and entertainment-based games. And part of that is just the challenge of indexing and identifying all of those educational games, because it's hard enough to find these commercial games that got big releases. It is nearly impossible to track down all of the educational games. But that is certainly something that I went back and forth on about what role educational games should play in this data set. The indie games is another great question, and my answer is that what I've started to do is to consider my research as separate from that Turtle Island games collection. So for the purposes of drawing these boundaries, right? So for my research, which I'm hoping, like, knock on, plywood, will be a second book. I am only counting games that have received an official release on a console or on a PC or Mac, right? And the reason for that, again, is related to that educational games issue, right? Like the indexing. There's so many games on itch.io. There are so many fantastic games that are just thrown up on a website, right? And it would be impossible to ever track them all down in a really comprehensive way. So for my own research leading toward this book, I am defining my data set as not including those. But for the Turtle Island game collection that we want to use for teaching and for educating students, we are absolutely including those, because a good counterpoint to talking about some of these problematic representations is to look at a game like Don't Wake the Night or When Rivers Were Trails or Terra Nova, and to really create that contrast for what it looks like when Native peoples represent themselves. And this is part of like that slide that I showed you that had, Pocahontas on the one side and smoke signals on the other, right? So for the Turtle Island Games collection, absolutely. And one of the things that we're talking about doing is, how do you archive a game that is only released on a website, right? How do you ethically preserve a game that's on itch.io? And tracking through those issues and thinking about those concerns is incredibly important to us.
All right. Awesome. Thanks.
I want to ask, actually, I see Matthew Morrison saying, I remember that game. I'm curious which game it was.
It was the last game, and I am also curious.
Werewolf. Was it Werewolf the Last Warrior?
Yeah, that looks like a
wild.
It looks like a wild, like his hands look like a wild precursor
Yeah.
to Wolverine. Talk to me about it.
And I will say, that one was particularly interesting for the data set because I had found it on lists of native characters, but if you play the game, it's not explicitly clear that he's native. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about, like, do I include it? Don't I include it? And I found out that packaged with the game when it was first released was a comic. Turok did this as well, packaged a comic with the game, right? And if you read that comment, it made it explicit that he was a member of a tribe from South Dakota. They're shown like sitting in their teepees. He goes on a vision quest, and so when the cataclysm hits the rest of the world, he's still inside. Then he becomes werewolf. And so once I saw that comic, I said, like, okay, he definitely counts. But without that comic, I was struggling to say if I felt like he actually fit the data set or not. So especially for some of these older games, I'm using comics, I'm using manuals, I'm reading the back of the box to try to gather all the information that I can.
If I may, could I ask another one? All right.
Sure.
So you kind of touched on this briefly when you discussed the torrents with World of Warcraft, but what role do other characters that are inspired by, I'm not going to say Native American culture because to me they feel more like Native American tropes in video games, and then they end up becoming like not even human. I'm thinking specifically stuff like Red 13.
I was actually, I was going to mention Red 13. And those are other ones that I kind of went around and around about whether they should get included in this data set or not. And, like when you're doing quantitative research as much as possible, you want to be comparing like to like, right? So ultimately I made the decision not to include them in this data set. But when talking about that broader idea of representation, I think they're absolutely important, right? Like the music that you hear when Red 13 is around is reminiscent of like flutes and drummings and stuff like that. So from the broader perspective of representation, I think that there's a lot more that comes in. And again, in the Turtle Island Games collection, we are collecting that game so that we have it. So the distinction between sort of the research leading to the book versus what we're keeping in the library, it's much more expansive what we're keeping in the library.
All right, awesome, thanks.
I thought I saw a raised hand at one point, but then it went down maybe.
That was me. I was actually asking a similar question about, do you count fantasy races that are not native but are clearly inspired by the same thought? Because coincidentally enough, I do a YouTube channel with playthroughs of retro adventure games, and I'm currently about to start, well, I just finished playing, it'll actually start running next week, Sam and Max Hit the Road, which I don't know if you're familiar with that one. Well, it's an adventure game based on an underground comic book, but the whole plot of it is that you play these detectives who are hired to track down a Bigfoot that has apparently been kidnapped from the freak show that he was kept in, and you wind up finding out that all of these big feet are disappearing from around the country and are getting ready to go to their annual meeting, and the Bigfoot culture is very clearly inspired by Native American culture. And the ultimate plot line of the game is that you help them interpret a prophecy that's laid out in these 4 totem poles, and have to gather the items they need to cause the forest to regrow. So, hey, human civilization is ruined and the forests are back. We are back and happy again. So, it's the same trope basically, but it's, right down to the head Bigfoot wearing a very ornate headdress that is, So we know what you're doing, but this just feels a little weird somehow.
Yeah, and there's another game. I wish I had my spreadsheet up in front of me, because one of the things that I've started doing is recording a game that falls outside of my data set but seems worth remembering, which I think that would fall into that category. And there was one where you play as a pencil, and at one part it turns out that you are animate because you were once part of a Native American totem pole, and you got broken off and made into a pencil, and then you go on this adventure. And it's sort of a similar, right? Debating how to include that. Another example is Until Dawn, which has Wendigos. Man, if we talk about games with Wendigos, that opens up the data set quite a bit. But Until Dawn talks about Wendigos. You have some letters that you can read which reference Native characters and Native issues, but they don't appear actually in the game. And so again, for the purposes of comprehension, I decided to draw the line at it had to be a human Native character. And then I'm also explicitly looking either for the situation to clearly tell me that the character is Native. So all of these, Western games where they maybe never specifically refer to the natives, but they're obviously Native Americans. Or that Ultima Savage Worlds game, I debated about whether to include them or not, but then in my research I found that they are explicitly referred to as descended from the Sioux, and so that's why I decided to include them. But I've tried to focus on keeping it as comprehensive as possible, at least with regards to having human characters that are clearly either explicitly named as being Native American or from the setting are clearly Native American.
I mean, you've got even me thinking about Primal Rage, where it's I don't think that the characters are explicitly indigenous or Native American, but they are certainly styled as primal people with darker skin. So yeah, this has opened up a lot of thoughts for me.
And I will say, especially with the question about indigenous schemes and how that relates to my book, ultimately what I decided is that my book is about, commercially released games. Indigenously developed and created games are obviously very important and definitely something that I talk about in my teaching. But that's another book, and maybe I'll write that book, or maybe somebody else will write that book, but it shouldn't be a chapter in my book. It deserves its own full book on it. And so that's part of why we include it in the collection, but in my research data set, I'm not.
We did have one quick question in the chat. Are you looking for a library to house your collection?
Well, right now everything is housed at the TCU library. So right now we are definitely covered, and we're also sort of loosely chatting with the Game Museum in Frisco about resources that they have and materials that they have. But I greatly appreciate the offer.
Awesome.
You want to pay my bill for my website? I'll do that.
All right. With that, I think we are coming up on the time for our next panel, so I'll go ahead and hand it over to Keyhano, who will tell you about our gaming community panel. Thank you so much, Dr. Sierra. This was very, very informative and sparked a lot of good discussion.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Thanks so much. And now we are going to move on with our gaming and community panel. And in this panel, we will be listening from Dr. Eddy Lynton, Dr. Cory Adkins, both faculty at Texas Wesleyan, Dr. Jason Helms, and Dr. Wendi Sierra. And originally, we invited Professor Audrey Haferkamp. She will not be able to make it, but we are joined instead by Professor Alex Baumann and Mr. Zahmar Rounds from Marine Creek College. Are all of you here? Let's do a quick check, make sure that we're all connected and have our audio working.
Hi, I'm Jason. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect.
Eddy, you're muted.
Okay, how's that? Hi, I'm Eddy.
Yeah, perfect. We can hear you.
Hey, I'm Cory Adkinson. Pleasure to meet y'all. I don't have a cool headset.
It's perfectly cool.
Yeah, you know, the irony about that is that we're seeing that all of you have some really cool headsets, and we can tell who the gamers are in here. Let me tell you.
Yeah, for
I gotta
sure.
up my game, man.
Mm-hmm. And then I know that I saw in the invite list and the guest list there are Alexander and Zahmar. I don't know if you're having issues connecting or not, but if you are, you can drop a message in the chat and you can join us whenever you're ready to go. So I want this panel to be kind of laid back, just a reflection on the work that you do. You know, consider how the gaming communities in your campuses and the kind of work that you do has shaped your professional outlook, et cetera, et cetera. But before that, I want to start with, you know, just kind of laid back, fun question. You know, do you have a favorite game, a game that you're best at and you have no competition? You know, what's your most impressive game accomplishment? So I'm gonna go from top left to bottom right on my screen. Jason, do you want to go first?
Sure. I've got a recent one. I think 2 days ago, I reinstalled What the Golf. I don't know how many of y'all have played that. Great kind of just collection of mini games that all loosely connect with golf and are mostly making fun of golf. And I found out that they have daily challenges now. And after about an hour's worth of work, I placed in the top 5 globally on that day's daily challenge. So I feel very important. Let's not talk about how many people are still playing that game on a daily basis, but the answer is me and at least 4 other people.
All right, for sure. All right, and we are being joined by Alex and Zahmar. All right, so Wendi.
Ah, man, that's rough. I think that in terms of accomplishment, I once hit a 2200 arena ranking in World of Warcraft. This was during Kata, so I feel pretty good about that. I was very much carried. I'm awful. I'm not awful. Maybe I'm awful. I don't know.
You're not.
Stop being mean to yourself.
I'm not going to duel anybody in World of Warcraft right now. But yeah, favorite game is rough, man. It changes constantly. But I absolutely love Soma by Frictional. Huge fan of horror games, so that's the one I'm gonna go with, Soma.
Nice, very cool. And then Alexander.
All right, so accomplishment. At the end of the 8th generation of Pokemon, I had a complete living dex. For those of you who know what that means, that took a lot of time. And the other part was favorite something or other, right? Oh gosh, I'm really enjoying Infinite right now, Halo Infinite.
Very cool.
But I love the Spider-Man on PS4 and God of War on PS4. Those are my top 2.
Awesome. Yeah, good choices. Carrie?
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and sorry, I just realized my computer's about to die. But I'm going to go ahead and piggyback off the Spider-Man comment. The Spider-Man PS4 game is the only game I've ever reached 100% completion on of all the objectives, including the secret objectives on there. I've also played every one of the to completion, every one of the Resident Evil games except for Resident Evil Village, which is on my playlist. So yeah, I'm a big time completist. I love to complete games. I feel a great sense of accomplishment.
Nice, respect.
Even more so than earning a PhD.
For sure, sometimes, yeah. Eddie.
Okay, well, I was in the top 3 on Fortnite, and it's because I glitched through the map, so I managed to get on the top 3. That was awesome. I felt so cool that day. But my all-time favorite game is the ever controversial but oh so cool Star Citizen. I love that game. That is where I go to relax. That is it right there.
Nice. And Zahmar?
Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, gaming accomplishments. I've been stuck in a rut as far as my games are concerned. So, for a little while, when I used to practice Street Fighter, I made it into like the top 20,000 in the world for a little bit, and then being an adult, I guess, happened, so that we kind of fell out of that. And then as far as favorite game would probably be what's this fighting game? It's called a Bushido Blade. It's like an old PlayStation 1 game, and it just like your two samurai or Ronin or whatnot, I'm not sure, and you'd fight, and it was one of the few games you could have one hit strike downs, or you hit somebody in the leg and their leg, they start limping, and I thought that was like the most immersive thing ever. So
yeah, for sure.
That's that.
That game was so frustrating when it came out for me. But yeah, for me, my greatest accomplishment was for a total of 2 minutes and 37 seconds. I was #1 in the world in Samurai Showdown when it came out. I was quickly dropped to 100 and something and have never been able to even crack 1,000 after that. But for a hot 2 minutes, I was #1, so yay for that. And currently hooked on Genshin Impact. Tell us about the gaming communities that you work with on campus. What do you do? What's the purpose? I know that some of us have a more teaching focus. Others kind of curate these spaces so that students have a place to chill. Others are more scholarly. So what work do you do in your gaming spaces? Jason?
So I mostly teach. There's a team of us that helped set up the gaming lab at TCU, no quarters. So that space exists, and I believe some of the there's 2 or maybe now 3 gaming clubs on campus dedicated to esports or tabletop or various other communities. But mostly I teach and start interacting with people that way. Yeah, that would be it. I teach a gender and sexuality in video games course. I co-teach with Gabby Kirilov. And we teach that pretty close to every semester now. It started out once every 2 years and just got more and more popular. And now we teach multiple sections each semester. Yeah.
Nice. And then you mentioned the no quarter space. What was your involvement in the creation of that space?
Writing internal grants mainly, and then helping kind of plan it. So we were able to build the space entirely using internal grants that were definitely not intended for that purpose. And I'm still surprised that TCU let us spend a bunch of money on video games, but it was the right decision, and I'm happy that we did that. One of the main reasons behind it was talking to other colleagues and finding out that a few of us had assigned video games in non-video game classes. So I was teaching a class on non-human rhetorics, and I assigned the video game Everything, where you literally can play as everything. Every object in the entire world. It's a really fun, interesting game. From galaxies all the way down to like protons and stuff. And that was a great game to talk about just kind of networks of relationships and start to talk about non-human rhetoric. Students loved it. It was a great hit. But it was really tough to figure out a way to let them play it. If they didn't have a console, if they didn't have a machine that could do that. And so I got 2 licenses for it for the library, got them in the video editing bays that they had, because those were the computers that could run it. And that was kind of the wake-up call of, if I want to assign a video game, how do I then get students to play it? Which has been one of the difficult parts of teaching games is trying to find a game that people can play. People want to say, hey, why don't we teach the new, Horizon Forbidden West came out, or Elden Ring is coming out, right? This semester we could teach that. We could focus on what's new, what's happening, and it's like, okay, maybe a third of my students can play it, and that's of a class designed for video games, because they just don't have a console that's ready for it. Also, it's a big expense, so having the library have a place where people can actually come check out games and play them.
Yeah, sure. And in the case of Elden Ring, even if you have the console and the money to get it, there's a difficulty layer to that. Wendi.
Yeah, so I'm sort of similar to Jason. Like you mentioned in my intro in the last session that I'm a professor of games. So the vast majority of my class list is some variation of like games and, right? So games and learning, games and representation. This semester I'm doing the worldliness of virtual worlds. So my students we're in a guild together in World of Warcraft, and we're reading some like general cultural geography, place versus space type research, and we're thinking about how that applies in our virtual world. And some of the same challenges that Jason has mentioned, right? So for the Warcraft class, once a week we're in a regular classroom, and we just kind of have discussion-based time. And then the other times of the week, we are in a lab on campus. That's basically the only lab where they would let us install World of Warcraft. And one of the big challenges actually is the updates, right? Because as an MMO, WoW updates fairly regularly, and most instructional labs, IT departments do not want to let you be constantly updating, right? They're worried about, rightfully so, what's going to happen to the computer. How is this going to be a challenge for other users of the computer? And so we're kind of limited in what labs we can use. And like, wow, right now, I want to say it's at 95 gigs, right? So it's not something that every student is going to be willing to download onto their personal computer, even if they can run it, right? So navigating some of those challenges. And the last section, I talked about the Turtle Island Games collection, and one of the big things as we're really starting to get this running that I'm excited to do is sort of proselytizing across campus to faculty about, look, here's this research, here's this resource for you. If you want to assign games, here's some ways to do it. Here's some things that you have. At my previous institution, I also supervised the esports team, which was a time and a half. And I hesitate to say, but I'm sort of grateful that I'm not doing that here at TCU, that I am not in charge of supervising the esports team.
All right, awesome. Thanks so much. Alex.
All right, my computer's catching up with me. All right, there we go. We're Zahmar and I are both at the Northwest campus. I'm actually a staff person, not quite a professor, but we host a Gaming for Change event that we have put on for 3 years in a row now. There's an extensive behind the scenes for a day of Super Smash Bros. and Tekken, or not Tekken, Street Fighter 5. And then this year, Rocket League. That we scrounge around for people that will come and join our team for that. That's how I'm influencing games on the campus. I know we also have some clubs, but I'm not quite in tune with those at the moment.
All right, awesome. Thanks, Carrie. You're muted. Sorry. Carrie, you're muted.
Picking buttons is my life. Yeah. So I'm a criminal justice professor at Texas Wesleyan, and the first course I developed was actually a special topics course that was I got to be honest, it was student demand. I had a few students who are like, why don't we have any kind of video game content in any of our classes, just because of the obvious kind of criminal justice connotations, things like Grand Theft Auto, which we'll be talking about here. Dr. Lynton and I will be talking about here shortly. So I developed a class called Video Games and Crime. And essentially the whole idea of that course was to look through the various ways that crime and justice, morality tales are told through video games. I also allowed students to play video games of their own choosing, because like Jason said, sometimes it's difficult. You don't know what students' backgrounds are in terms of what they can actually access or can afford. And so I had them basically pick. They could do a mobile game, something on their phone. Games that are cheap, games you don't have to pay a lot of money to play. But I opened that up to console games. Laptop-based games, just pretty much anything that will allow students to enjoy what they like to enjoy, as opposed to me kind of foisting it on them and making them do something. And that class was pretty much a test run, and it was real successful. And then this semester, I'm teaching a class called Pop Culture and Crime, which we look at all the different ways that crime is expressed and mediated through forms of popular culture. And one of the modules in that course is video games, and they're going to have to do a review of a video game where they go out and play one and talk about the criminal justice implications of the themes within the video game, and then actually kind of rate the video game for other students. So if other students haven't had a chance to play it, on a scale from 0 to 10, with 10 being the best game you've ever played in your life, ranking the video games. And that's how I engage students in the classroom. But we also have a really vibrant esports program. And over the last 6 or so months, I've been working with Eugene Fryer, who is our esports administrator. And we're just trying to talk about ways that we can bring video games to our campus and to get students engaged. So I'm helping him develop a video game course as well now. So I think it's great. It's a wonderful way to engage students, to get them excited about things that they're already excited about. And as soon as you do that, the rest is just kind of the cherry on top, because they already want to be in the classes, and they already want to be talking about these things. So if you can kind of approach it from a standpoint of the things that the students love, then it kind of makes the overall course easy to sell.
All right, awesome. That class sounds like fun. Eddie.
So one of the ways that I used it was especially during COVID, when we went into our homes, and for a while there we're not allowed outside of our home. It was a great way for our students to connect and engage, and so that's what we did. Was we created these little communities for them to meet up and play and still get to talking and stuff. So it was really convenient in that sense. I use it in my deviant behavior class, much like you're going to hear in our presentation here in a little bit. Sort of that mix between like comic books and how they were initially seen as causing crime or a catalyst to crime. That same sort of concept of the play of games, and how they are viewed oftentimes as contributing to crime, and so it becomes something that we can talk about. I also use it, much like Carrie, to open dialogue with our students. It's a great way to break ice and get them to start talking about themselves and their interests, and it really gets them interested in the classroom and in engagement. I mean, they see you in a different light. It humanizes you. So it's been a valuable tool for teaching.
For sure. Couldn't agree more. Go ahead, Zahmar.
Hey, so as Alex mentioned, right, that we worked on gaming for change, and right, unfortunately, during the home time, we didn't online. It didn't quite hit, if you will, the way we had kind of wanted, right? In person, however, the first time we did it was incredible. Even though we were still trying to figure out what to do, what games to play. We had this intermingling. You've got people trading phone numbers. You've got people from the community that are coming in, and that was really solid. Hopefully we can get back to that. In this instance, online wasn't personal enough to foster what we were looking for.
Yeah, for sure. We're actually going to host the one on TR sometime in March, likely on the 24th. So you're all invited to that event, and I'll keep you posted. I'll update the website once we get confirmation for all the rooms. So the next one, most of you have already answered the first half, which is how does your role as either instructor, researcher, admin, or staff intersect with games? Then the follow-up would be kind of how did you make the connection between what you do professionally and games? Basically, how did you go from Hadoken to, researching? Jason?
Yeah, mine's kind of a weird story. I definitely gamed a lot growing up and, throughout high school. Kind of fell off a bit in college, or only did, GoldenEye and that kind of stuff in the dorm. And definitely had fallen off by grad school. So during my PhD at Clemson, I helped design a grad seminar on games because I just was curious and wanted to learn more. And by the time the class was actually created and got on the books, I had moved on to dissertation and wasn't able to take the class that I helped create, unfortunately. And so I was interested, but hadn't made that leap into actually making it part of my research or teaching in any way. Went off, got my first job, and got my second job at TCU. And when I came here, they said, hey, you're young and a dude. Can you teach our video game class? And I was like, I literally have no expertise. And they said, well, we created this class. Nobody's taught it yet. But we got a class about video games called Writing Games. And we were thinking that students would play maybe some games or maybe not play, but just read about games. And then we could do some really cool multimodal projects. They could design a poster for a game that they want to make, which is kind of fun. But I thought it'd be much more fun to actually make a game than make something about a game that you didn't make. And so I started doing that. And then my second time teaching it, I was using Inform at the time, which is text-based gaming like Zork and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. My second time teaching it was in 2014, fall of 2014. And Gamergate happened. And it was all over the news. And so we started talking about it. And at the time, half my students were women. And it was a group of nursing majors that all took my class at the same time. And then half my class were pretty much men who had sought it out because of the video games. And so these were students who weren't necessarily interested in talking about the same things I was, from both sides. And yet these things were happening in the news, so I just kind of brought it into the class, and we started having conversations. And suddenly the projects got a lot better, and they got much more interesting, and they have started getting into it. And that's what shifted the class from being just writing games, this kind of broad, video game stuff, to being gender and sexuality in video games. So then the next time I offered it, that was actually the topic, and that was the focus. And I said, okay, I like where they're going with it. Now let's give them some tools and give them some readings, and we'll read just some it's a 2000 level class, so just some introductory feminist queer theory stuff. Have them really start streamlining the games that they're making, and eventually I switched over from Inform to Twine, just because of ease of use. And the difficulty, and the fact that none of the students liked text-based gaming, something I still like, but they are all still stuck on, I have to type things. That sounds awful. This feels like homework, not a video game. I get it. It's true. It's fine. And yeah, that's basically how it converted. So I kind of came at it, I don't know, somewhat backwards. And then by the fourth time I taught it, I think, a student came up to me and said, hey, what do you think of representation in Breath of the Wild and how Zelda's represented? Did you think that she has more agency, or do you think this is a way of actually kind of giving her less agency and pulling her off the stage, even though she's supposedly so important? And I said, I haven't played a Zelda game since 1993. I don't know what you're talking about because I just was assigned this class. I don't have any current consoles. I don't have any current anything. And I still had some startup money from when I got hired at TCU, so that was my first example of just getting TCU to buy a bunch of video games for me. I had to buy me just a Switch and Breath of the Wild, started there, and get me an Xbox, and just went with that. And just spent the summer just plowing through kind of everything that had happened over the last 20 years when I hadn't been playing video games. Great summer. Definitely recommend it. And then the next year I was able to actually be moderately intelligent in conversations. But it was this really learning moment of, wow, my students know a lot more about this than I do, and I need to catch up. There's some things I know about too that they don't, that I might be able to help, but I need to get to like a base level of understanding about what's happening in video games before I can have those conversations.
Nice, very cool. How about you, Wendi?
Exact same story. Someone was like, "Hey, you're a dude. Teach this." No, not at all. Not at all. Actually, I worked very hard to get this. So sort of similar in the early part of the story, right? Like always a gamer, always played games with my parents. Pointedly remember playing Duke Nukem at a very inappropriate age because my dad had like it and all the expansions, right? Went to college and my family played World of Warcraft together. We had like parties and WoW. When I was a broke grad student, I would buy my parents like, hey, I got you these sick purples. I can't afford anything in real life, but here's some gear for your character. In fact, at one point, we don't play so much anymore, but like I would get calls from my mom like, honey, you know that your dad really needs to run this dungeon. Could you please just help your father, right? So like that was a big part of my family life. Had a little bit of a dip in high school and early college, but definitely came back around grad school. But like this is, I don't know, this almost feels like a villain origin story, right? So I'm in rhetoric. I'm a master's student. I'm studying technology. That's sort of my focus, but still trying to figure out where to go with that. And I was watching, of all things, The Daily Show. And who should be on The Daily Show? Yeah, Jason knows where this is going. Who should be on The Daily Show but Ian Bogost? And he's talking about procedural rhetoric and persuasive games. And I was like, what the heck? Like, this dude, he's using my words, like he's using rhetoric, and he's talking about video games. Like, I didn't even know you could do that. So basically, from that point, I was like, this is it. Like, if that bro can do it, I can definitely do it. And so I picked my PhD program based on a place that would let me study games. Got my first job kind of singing the song like, oh, multimodality. I'm a multimodal rhetoric scholar, but with the heart in, oh yeah, also not a fan. That's why I say like maybe it's a villain origin story, right? But yeah, I got my start kind of singing the song of like, I'm a multimodal rhetorics person. And then once I got there, I was on a 3-3 load, and I told them, well, I have to teach a class that's about programming. And I'm in an English department. If you don't let me teach a programming class, I can't progress my scholarship. I'm not going to be able to stay relevant. This is all bullshit, right? Like there are many, many game studies professors that do not code, and that is not a requirement. But this is the song I sang. And so I got to teach game design 1 and 2, which were C# and Unity, right? And we did platformers in the first part and like infinite runners, and then we did some like very, very basic RPGs and stuff like that in the second part. And so I kind of threw off that like multimodal rhetorics basically once I got the job, and was like, JK, I'm a games person, and kept going hard down that route. And then managed to pivot into this position that I have now that is explicitly game studies versus like English asterisks, but like really just games. So that was my sort of trajectory through academia.
Nice, very
And
cool.
I make games. Yeah, I'm because I won an award last year, an award-winning game designer.
Congrats.
So
Congratulations, that's awesome. Can I chime in real fast?
Yeah,
'Cause
absolutely.
you said
Go
something
for
there
it.
that's really, really fascinating. I mean, so when you went to your department, because Carrie and I have talked about this at length about how sometimes there's this like pushback when you try to introduce these sorts of. I mean, we've been really fortunate and had a lot of support at Wesleyan. But I mean, did you face a lot of pushback when you tried to introduce the topic, or?
I actually didn't, which was really amazing and supportive of the department I had. I just kind of went in real confident and I was like, look, I'm absolutely, like I'm going to teach her one freshman writing course a semester that you need me to teach. It's going to be about games, by the way, but I'm going to teach it. And I understand that there are like some other requirements that you need me to teach. Digital rhetorics, that's going to be a lot about games. Writing with new media, we're going to do twine games. But I'm going to do those, I promise. But I just kind of said to stay relevant in my field, this is what I have to do. And they, to the chair's credit, she was like, okay, like if this is what you need to do, then we're going to support you doing it. I also think this is the sort of less rosy utopian perception. There was a real fear when I came into the English department, English department fighting for students, sometimes trying to make sure that we meet those seat numbers that we have to meet. There was a big fear that my classes were going to steal all the students. I think that was actually a bit misguided because there are a lot of students that get into English because they love books.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so I don't think that was actually correct, but that was the fear. And so when I came and said like, well, for one of my classes a semester, instead of teaching what you think is the trendy fun stuff, I want to teach programming. I think they read that as like, oh, good, our English students don't want that, so you won't be stealing seats from our students. And I ended up getting actually a lot of communication majors and a lot of computer science majors in that course. So the rosy is like, oh, they wanted to support my growth and development. And the perhaps more realistic is they didn't want me to take students out of their upper level classes. And maybe both are true.
Yeah.
Maybe both.
Awesome. So something that I suppose I should have said earlier. If you want to reply to each other, please do go ahead, jump in, and engage in that conversation. But anyway, Alex, you're up. How did you go from gamer to realizing, hey, games are something that could work in my professional setting?
Sure. So of course, college gaming is a thing for a lot of students. I was roped into it by Zahmar when he asked if I could, what's the word I'm looking for here? Moderate Super Smash Brothers for the Gaming for Change event. And really what we see is that there are people who didn't necessarily grow up playing video games that are now in these roles where they have this opportunity to do stuff with video games, and they need people who do know excessive amounts about video games to help them bridge that gap between what they want to do and how to do it. So that's really it on my end. Because I work with bacteria, and while I've thought about how to make a video game with bacteria, it's not quite. Yeah. I can't just say, hey, instead of culturing bacteria, here's a video game yet. So that's really it for me.
All right, cool. Yeah, it's the only one that I know that might be remotely relevant is Spore, and I don't even know how much it would actually fit. But yeah, thanks for sharing. Cory, how about you? Sorry, muted.
I'm trying to be all polite, and I forget I muted myself. But yeah, I got to be honest. I really enjoy my job, and I look actively for ways to enjoy my job more. And when I was in grad school trying to figure out what I wanted to do for my dissertation, I had the good fortune of being it was a law and society class. And I had the good fortune of having a professor that when I brought up a project in that class to talk about the importance of comic book characters to our understanding of crime and justice, he was very, very receptive to that. And in fact, that ended up, kind of springboarding me into doing my dissertation on The Amazing Spider-Man. And because of that, I got this, very warm and very encouraging response of, pop culture stuff is legitimate. It's academically it can be academically rigorous, especially when you start getting into the literature on the subject. But just knowing that all forms of pop culture were kind of no pun intended, like fair game. And from that, I started thinking, well, gosh, if I can get paid to read comic books for a living, maybe I maybe I can get paid to play video games too. And so from there, it was just like all forms of popular, movies, TV shows, just all the stuff that I love to do in my spare time. Why don't try to, Vulcan mind meld those two worlds, so that you can do what you enjoy, like on the job. And one of the best things about that is when I started kind of bringing that stuff into the classroom, the students were overwhelmingly super excited about it and really positive about it. And like Eddy was saying, at our university, we've gotten a lot of support for any kind of pop culture, comic book, video game, just pretty much whatever we want to bring up. And one of the ways we do that is through our special topics classes, which, our students are required to take up to 6 special topics hours, but the professors can teach whatever special topics that they feel are relevant. So kind of like what Wendi was saying, things that, I could argue are professional development for me. I have to kind of stay current. I can't get behind on reading comic books and playing video games. So please let me teach these classes. And they always say yes. And one of the great things about these special topics classes is that when you teach them, it's kind of like Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. If you teach a special topics class and enough students show up for that, then you can go to the administrators and say, look, thank you for giving me this opportunity, but see how popular this is, and see how many students we had to let in over the cap because they just really wanted to be in this class. And then of course they start thinking, enrollment and retention, and yeah, let's get some more of these courses on a schedule. So it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy where, once you see that students are engaged in it and you're getting students into the seats and it's something everybody's having a lot of fun doing, then of course that makes it a lot easier to get administrative buy-in and support.
For sure. Well, sorry, I was muted. For sure. How about you, Eddy? How did you go from gaming to your professional space and integrating games into it?
So when I was working on my thesis, this was my escape, my way to recharge, and then later my dissertation was gaming. And then I started working with students who were in some sort of academic distress. And when I was in grad school, they said I got the most wise advice of all, and that was every class you take, tie it to whatever your interest is, whatever your and so I was working with these kids who were in academic distress, and one of them was a diehard gamer. And I told this individual to do the same thing. I said, take that game and apply it to every one of your classes. And it had a profound effect for the students. The students started getting engaged in their classes, and their grades went up. And so it became something that I just was able to introduce into my own classes. And then I credit Carrie a lot for this, because in criminal justice, for the longest time, there was this like strict, this is criminal justice and it must be this way. And I think Carrie, for instance, opened up a lot of avenues for us to sort of go beyond that, cops, courts, corrections. Hey, let's also look at comics and video games. And if y'all hear a whine, it's not me, it's my dog who wants to go for a walk right now. So I apologize for that. But anyway, and so that's opened up a number of avenues for discussing complex topics. And I went ahead and bragged about you there, Carrie. I put the link in there of one of the videos that they made about him, and I encourage you guys to watch that, because I think it reinforces and I think really brings home how we can use these tools to meet our students where they're at.
Thank you, Eddy.
Nice, that's awesome. Sorry, I muted myself again. Awesome. That's a really cool perspective. And Zahmar kind of left. Oh no, Zahmar switched over. Go for it, Zahmar.
Oh, so kind of, somewhat with Alex. So I was brought on to kind of help with the organizing and the tournament bracketeering, if you will. But that experience for Gaming from Change and being able to do that was because I had been immersed in, well, FGC, the fighting game community. So I've been going to tournaments, working on tournament organization there, being a part of the bracket, understanding the system, kind of understanding the crowds, being able to corral people and, when to get loud, when to quiet down, that sort of thing. So for Gaming for Change, I think that was helpful. I've yet to put that expertise to work for the good of the people elsewhere. But perhaps I'll have the opportunity. So.
All right, very cool. I think it's really interesting that how we all have different stories on how we got here. I just always assumed everyone was kind of like mine. I've always been a gamer. My first memory was playing Log and Chase with my mom. I don't know how many of you are aware of this. I'm an ESL kid. My first language growing up was Spanish. But I learned English because of video games. And so when I went into college, I decided I'm going to do everything I can to put PlayStations in classrooms. And I kind of had to force my way through the very kind of traditional at the time field of education. And I kind of thought everyone was sort of like that, but it turns out that Jason was kind of like pulled into it along with Alexander, and then Wendi had to go kind of like a long way round, finding connections. So that's really cool for me to learn that about those experiences. So the next question, let's see, a couple of these you've already addressed in this conversation. Clearly, you all see educational value to games. Um, Alex and Zahmar, you've already talked about the Games for Change event, but this is more, I guess, for Jason, Wendi, Carrie, and Eddy. What gaming events do you hold in your campus? Jason, sorry.
So the pandemic was rough on this because we had just started. So we did a Smash Brothers tournament, which Johansson, you came to in 2019, I think 2018, 2019, something in there.
Yeah.
And built off of that, we did a few of those. I think we did 2 of those, maybe a third. And then we're scheduled to have a really big one around the first NTX gaming symposium, which was going to be March of 2020. And we built for this for a year, and we rented out space, and we secured lots of stuff. We were ready. We even had some really cool hands-on stuff. We were going to have people build Game Boys together. It was going to be amazing. It was fantastic. It was, I think, March 24th.
Yep.
And then the pandemic happened, and everything fell apart.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a lot of those efforts have kind of slowed down. And a lot of those gaming events, we ended up running the symposium a year later. We postponed it by a year. We first, I think, postponed it by a month. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
You remember that time when it was like, okay, so we'll just do it in April then.
Yeah.
Okay, no, we'll just do it. Do we want to do it in the fall? Do we push it to the fall?
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, we did it in the spring as a completely online event,
Yeah.
which was great. And Wendi and Johansson, you were both keynote speakers at it. It was wonderful. I liked it anyway.
Yeah.
And since then, not much. Hopefully, we'll get back to that.
Yeah, for sure. And my hope was to reboot and kind of go from here and go big, but now the weather also seems to have something to say about that, and so we're moving it online again. But I think it's been great so far, and the rest of it I know will be just as awesome.
My goal is that the NTX Gaming Symposium continues long into the future and is hosted at a variety of DFW campuses, and that we always plan on doing it in person, and that it never happens. That's my supervillain goal.
I see that happening. Wendy, is there anything you'd like to add? I know that you're in the same campus with Jason.
Yeah, and I came during the Corona times. So at my previous institution, I mentioned I was the faculty advisor for esports, and so and through getting that together, writing the handbook, hosting tryouts, getting involved with a specific league, doing some scrimmages with some local schools. So I supported a lot of that effort. We also had a non-competitive gaming club. So we did, my mind is blanking. It's the 24-hour extra life. Extra life? Yeah.
Yeah.
We did Extra Life every year in the fall, and that was really cool. Facilities always loved us when we called them, and we were like, yes, we will be hanging out on campus in one of the campus labs for 24 hours. We will be, having food in the entryway. We will be doing all of this stuff. That was fun. Making sure that, we never had the police called on us, that we notified everybody. We also we were starting to get into Magic gathering events. And perhaps my biggest regret about moving to Fort Worth is I had such a good local game store in Rochester that was so awesome, community oriented, did a lot of reach out stuff, worked with local schools, worked with libraries. And I haven't found that yet here. If there's one, I don't know about it. But we had started doing charity events in partnership with the local game store where, like we would host a tournament. We would fundraise a little bit to put up prizes. The store also put up some prizes. And then we would donate that money to local charities. Like we did a bird sanctuary one semester. So it was sort of the fall charity event was Extra Life, and then a spring charity event we were just starting to get rolling with the store. And that was really, really fun. This semester, at some point, my class developed a museum exhibit on Native American representation in games, which is going to be launching at the National Games Museum in Frisco. It was supposed to already launch, but we've had some slowdowns with the graphic designer. So, watch for that. But once it goes up, it should be up for about 8 months, I think they said, and it should be pretty cool. So we're replacing Donkey Kong for what that's worth.
Right. Awesome. I know of a local store that, at least with me, has been really great in kind of partnering with us in our events. So maybe they would work with you as well. It's Retribution Games. I can send you their contact info later today.
Oh, I'll have to check them out. I just went and bought a whole ton of stuff from them for the collection. And they were looking at all of the games that I had, and they were like, what's going on here? Like, what are you doing? Because different systems, different eras, right? And I said, Native American characters. And they were like, oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they're pretty cool. So what's going on in Texas Wesleyan? What kind of events do you guys host over there, Carrie and Eddie?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to echo Jason's lament. We were right in the middle of planning our first annual RamCon. We're the Rams. It was going to be a comic convention on our campus. We have a brand new student center that has 3 big ballrooms. The first, and this was our, well in the planning stages, and rooms reserved, and already have our guests coming. We had Bob Wayne, former owner of Fantastic Worlds Comics in Fort Worth in the 80s, who transitioned that into a vice president gig at DC Comics. He was going to be one of our special guests. Really excited about that. Nice. So we were going to have like a panel room, we were going to have a vendor room, but we were also going to have a gaming room, for tabletops. But of course, we were going to have the tech people come out and set up a Nintendo Switch and a PlayStation and Microsoft Xbox. And that was all well underway. And our last meeting to kind of finally approve everything was the week before spring break of 2020, and then a week later our university closed, and so that all got put by the wayside. Of course, the hope is as things ease up a little bit, that we can just kind of get back in the planning mode and kind of leapfrog from all the stuff we had already done, because we already did a lot of planning for it. But yeah, we were disappointed. The students were disappointed. One of our students was doing his internship as kind of the organizer of this, so we had to find a way to, help him fulfill his internship requirements. But yeah, speaking of collected, we had some of the owner, I think his name is Ron, if I'm not mistaken, already agreed to kind of bring a table out to campus and just kind of join in the fun. We had video game developers, people that had done voiceover work on video games and anime. I mean, we had all these wonderful things planned, and of course, COVID. So, but positive, always trying to see the positive side of things. The administration was very supportive of it. And so, we've already had conversations with them about, once things do kind of ease up a little bit, let's go ahead and get that ball rolling and get that back to campus. And of course, now that, we're meeting with all you wonderful people, I can keep you on the loop. And if y'all want to come out and join in the fun and be part of that, sure. You're always invited.
Awesome. Eddie, anything you want to add to that?
I just want to talk up our campus in terms of talk about this stuff and be surprised by how many people that you work with are really into this stuff. I mean, I remember when I was younger and I would go to the comic book store, and back then it wasn't as mainstream as it is now. And so I remember I'd have a friend who would drop me off at the comic book store so I could get my comics and nobody would see. Why I'm telling you that is because it's fascinating how many people on your campus will support this and are interested in this. At our own campus, I mean, we have what do we call it, the geek culture or geek club or something like that that's there.
Mhm.
Oh, you're muted again.
Nerd Central. I mean,
Nerd
I would
Central,
think like
yeah.
after 2 years of doing this, I'd realize that I'm muted. You know? But yeah, Nerd Central. Yeah, so that was kind of like our club for all things geek. Yeah.
And it's fascinating that, I mean, like the number of people who are on campus, and then the conversations that we have. Like, for instance, we have a psychologist who uses gaming and comic books to talk about issues in psychology. And so, I mean, it's just opened up. So when you were mentioning, teaching it in English, there's so many opportunities for this within the mainstream that I think we are only now beginning to explore and examine.
Awesome. And all right, there we go. Awesome. And then Zahmar and Alex, I know that you host the Games for Change during the fall semester at Trinity River. We hosted during spring. Do you want to talk a little bit more about your event, the kind of spin that you take on it, and any other stuff that you do over at Marine Creek?
I'll let Zahmar. No, me.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
The in-person bit was probably more exciting, so let's talk about that because I wasn't there for that.
So like the in-person bit, we tried this. We opened it up to the community. Of course, we got a hold of students, and we had our local MHMR bring people in. And I mean, we had pizza and prizes. It was kind of just a smorgasbord here of just come together, have a good time, meet people that are like you, that are unlike you. And these are all the people that enjoy video games, right? You wouldn't think that this person enjoys video games. Oh, did you know that the person that tutors you does whatever, or this person plays, Magic the Gathering, or knows about D&D? Did you know that these, right? And so that was like, that's the original purpose, was to bring people from all walks who you either wouldn't expect or wouldn't know, right? To fly their nerd flag, and from there, right? It's obviously the tournament, so you bring other people to the next one, and you meet people on Discord. Start getting out Discord handles. Hey, can I train you in this, or do you want to play Magic here? And then of course you build community. But golly gee, COVID really did a great job at going in there and just giving it the old scythe. And so, like I said, we're hoping to be able to get back in person. And then with Dr. Kihanu, right, who he's got we can also kind of start linking together. We were trying we can start bringing campuses together as well as a kind of a big group, right? Because the people from here can also go over there to Trinity River and experience it. And then we were, trying to branch out, hashtag the takeover. So that's the thing. But yeah, that's all. Thanks.
All right, awesome. I'm just laughing too much at your comments, Wendi, how you talk about how your Magic collection is worth more than your car. And I'm like, yeah, mine too. I should probably sell it off, but I don't want to.
Again, I do want to point out that I have a really crappy car. Like, it's a 2008 Nissan Altima. So
Yeah.
It's not like I'm driving around a nice car.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, this makes two of us. And then Jason, you talking about how Ian Bogost is cool, except when he wrote the Goose essay.
But I don't mean it as a compliment.
Yeah.
Exactly. The day after he wrote the Goose essay, I came into class, and I was co-teaching with Gabby, and my wife had bought me a shirt with. But by the way, just to catch people up, he wrote an essay about how the Goose game is not a game, It is instead, if I remember right, work, which was such a weird take. Just to say you don't like the game, man. It's fun. So my wife had gotten me a Goose Game shirt. I loved the Goose Game. It was really fun. And so I walked into class. We were teaching, and like 20 minutes into class, I said, so now we got to talk about this Ian Bogost article. And I click a button, and honk shows up in giant letters across my PowerPoint, like it was just stamped there. I yell honk multiple times in class and did a Superman, open it up, got the Goose Game shirt underneath, and said, Ian Bogost came for my goose. And I'm not having it. It was such a great conversation because we were scheduled anyway to talk about his Games Are Better Without Stories piece. You know, a similarly dreadful piece. And we teach the not Your Mama's Gamer response to it, which I think is one of the better responses. There's lots of good responses. That one does such a good job of collating lots and kind of getting all the fronts.
Also,
and it was
all
such
the
a great
people
conversation.
involved with Not Your Mama's Gamer are awesome. They're just
So
great.
so true.
All right.
Have you seen the Espen Airseth 10 play tips for the aspiring game studies scholar? I feel like it brings some big Bogost energy with it.
Maybe
That's not a positive.
Maybe I don't hate Espen as much. And maybe it's just because I never met Espen at a party when I was in grad school. And he just sat in a corner and like drank his beer and refused to talk to anyone. And when I tried to draw him out and say like, hey, tell me, I read your book. Let's talk about it. You seem really cool. And he just kind of stood there. I was like, yeah.
Are you like
I am
one
really
of the
cool.
is one
That's
of those
exactly what I
tips
am.
you? Like, oh, that was when he had to talk to Jason Helms. Yeah, it's a similarly obnoxiously gatekeeping, like, these are the boundaries and I declare them. Like, what the F ever, dude? Like, aren't games cool enough and wacky enough that we can just all do our thing and not have to, like, piss in a circle to mark the lines, right? Like,
Can we make
that's
a
always been his
circle
thing.
pissing game now? Like you said that now, like I drew it all out. It's like it's in Unity. It's kind of blocky, lots of pastels. Like I'm into this circle pissing game. It sounds really fun.
Yeah, for sure.
well, write a grant for it. Give me some of that internal grant money.
Yeah. But you know, that's always been our thing, just kind of gatekeeping. Like when game studies launched, it's like, oh no, we need to mark our boundaries. We can't let English come in and colonize game studies and blah blah blah. I remember writing a rebuttal, like really well sourced, you know, going even further back to narrativist, and he just replied, "We're not publishing this. I don't agree with it." And I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, if that's what we're going with." But anyway, it's been a great conversation. Thanks for joining us. You know, most of the other questions that I had, we've already addressed through all the stuff that we've shared. So thank you for joining us. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the future brings with your research and your work.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, I had a great time. That was so fun.
Totally agree. That was a blast. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
We'll be in touch about planning the next one.
Yeah, for sure.
Please.
And then I actually believe that for the next one will be hosted at Texas Wesleyan. So Eugene will be kind of like the point person there. And then Carrie and Eddie, perhaps you'd like to join the kind of planning meetings and all that stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Awesome.
Thank you.
I don't know how to make you presenters. Perhaps you already have that ability.
Oh, let's see. I'll see if I can pull up my PowerPoint. It says I can share.
Cool. So let me put on the hat of host again. Hello everyone. Welcome again for those of you who are just joining us. Next up, we have a presentation by Dr. Cory Adkinson and Dr. Eddy Lynton. They are members of the faculty at Texas Wesleyan University, and they will be sharing their insights on video games and criminal justice in a presentation titled The GTA Effect, Video Games, Crime, and Criminal Justice. Dr. Adkinson and Dr. Lynton, the floor is yours.
All right. I tried to share. Can y'all see it? Okay,
Yes.
great. So feel free to go ahead and chat at any time. me personally, I really like it, like when people chat and kind of give feedback. That's one of the cool things about the online environment is that, I guess people are more willing to kind of make a little chat than maybe if you were in a presentation or classroom style, that they might be a little bit less willing to do so. So please feel free to jump in any time. And so Eddie and I we've worked together a long time, and we're kind of like sharing a brain, I guess, when it comes to doing this kind of stuff. So how we're going to do this is we'll just kind of jump in and jump out. I'd kind of prepared this in terms of like being in person. So I do have a poll that I was going to see if y'all wanted to participate in real quick. If it doesn't work, I'm sorry. I gave it my best shot. We'll see what happens. All right. So hopefully this will work, but if you want to text your answer to Cory Adkinson 143, or text the Cory Adkinson 143 to the number 37607, and just click on or enter A, B, or C to answer this question. Have you ever played a violent video game? And hopefully it'll work. I'll try it too. And if not, we can just kind of move forward to the other slides and kind of get started. 7, 6, 6. Oh, look, it's working. Yay.
Who is tuning in, and everybody that is watching this video later, for sitting down with me to have this conversation. And I thank you for joining me for this small but interesting history lesson. So, a history of Gamergate, then. What does that mean?
So the whole point of asking this question,
as a whole,
of course, is because there's a lot in our media about the negative aspects of video games. However, and how video games, like Dr. Lynton was saying in our previous meeting, there's just been a lot of accusations, I guess, for lack of a better term, throughout the history of popular culture. And of course, he mentioned comic books, but we've seen this with comic books, we've seen this with video games, we've seen this with music, especially hip hop music in the 1990s. But just this idea that people are scared, that you have certain types of content, especially if kids are exposed to this, that it can have what's called a criminogenic effect. And criminogenic just means crime causing. And so that's we kind of wanted to look into that, and Dr. Linton came up with this really good, kind of term for this, the GTA effect. And so we're going to kind of go through the different aspects of the GTA effect, what it means, what the implications are, not just for kids or for players, but for our societal notions of crime and justice, good versus evil, our discussions about morality, proper norms, proper ways to act in our society. But we're also going to look at how video games can actually have some positive benefits to them in terms of criminal justice, specifically criminal justice training. And as we're going to see, there's some really exciting kind of cutting edge video game based simulation stuff that's going on in criminal justice right now.
The objective of this talk is not necessarily to describe.
So the next slide that I had, kind of a joke. But it's based on the idea that, is there this direct correlation between if you play video games or you watch violent movies or you read violent comic books, does that kind of automatically kind of put you in a state of mind where you're capable of committing violence? And as we're going to see, looking at research, there's actually a body of scientific research that sheds light on this, as we're going to see. So yeah. So nobody's murdered, at least you don't want to admit it just yet. Oh no, there's a murder in the midst. I'm just glad the technology's working. The poll everywhere is a really cool way to kind of get students engaged. And plus, if they're going to be on their cell phones, you might as well take advantage of it. Let's see, where's my little move forward there? Yeah, so at least in terms of what y'all are willing to admit. Yeah, 71% never murder anybody. I'm trying to go to the next. There we go. All right. And then this is just kind of a general question. You know, what are your beliefs? You know, are y'all concerned that video games do cause violence? Yeah. Yeah. And as we're going to see, you know, politicians, you know, maybe even well-meaning moral entrepreneurs in our society, you know, they're just trying to protect kids. They're just trying to address these really serious crime and social problems that we're seeing, you know, violence and you know, as we're going to talk about school shootings today and things like that. You know, I can understand why they are wanting to address these things and maybe wanting to address the potential of different forms of media to create antisocial or violent behavior. But when you actually compare that to the research, is there any support to that? So as we get into this, let me go ahead and go to the next slide. And then this is just kind of something we talked about earlier as well. And then I'll kind of hand it off to Dr. Lynton here and let him talk more about his work as well and his perspective on things. But just trying to engage students with different aspects of popular culture. You know, one of the wonderful things about teaching criminal justice is that popular culture is just rife with criminal justice meaning. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do, not just from a research perspective, but from a teaching perspective, is to engage students with the things that they like. You know, it's called pop culture for a reason because it's popular. But there's some deep stuff going on here. Like, what is it about pop culture and how it communicates meaning, you know, and how is that shaping people's attitudes about crime and justice? Is it shaping attitudes in a way that's kind of accurate to what the real world is like? And so by engaging students to look at crime and criminal justice through the lens of popular culture, not only kind of gets them excited, but also encourages them to look more deeply into the forms of pop culture that they like. And of course, video games is part of that. So Dr. Lynton, you want to take the baton? And I can,
okay,
yeah.
Just briefly. So we'll talk about some of the assignments that we've given. So for instance, like in a criminology course, we'll have them go out and they'll watch some sort of TV show or a movie, and then they'll use that character to talk about what criminological theory might explain the behavior, and they bring that back to the classroom and they open dialogue in that manner. We'll have conversations about the video game of itself and the actions of the character in the video game, and would those actions occur in a real life situation, given the rules, or given how rules play out in our society, that sort of thing. It opens up dialogue and an opportunity for conversations of that nature, and to look at these materials, like Dr. Adkinson said, where these students live. You know, they're watching TV, so might as well use it to our advantage. They're watching movies, might as well use it to our advantage. And then, of course, you know, having, like I said earlier, this humanizes you as the instructor also. I mean, it puts you at a level where they're able to see you beyond just this, you know, person at the front of the room, or, you know, this authority figure, whatever you happen to be in their eyes. Now you take on another persona and they're able to relate to you more. It's added to engagement in the classroom, without a doubt.
Yeah, and it's also really fun to see the looks on students' faces when you tell them, like, you know, yeah, I just beat the new Resident Evil game. They're like, what? You play Resident Evil? I was like, I've played all the Resident Evil games. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
But it's also interesting to kind of see the looks on their faces when you tell them, like, look, y'all kind of take this for granted, that you're born into a world of video games and they're just ubiquitous and they're on your cell phones and they're everywhere. You can't even escape them. But yet you look back to, you know, me and Eddy's childhood, you know, we're part of the first video game generation. You know, when we were born, video games weren't a thing. It wasn't really until like the late 70s, early 80s with the introduction of the, you know, Atari 2600 that kind of got the ball rolling. So we always kind of get a kick when we're talking to students about it, you know, because, you know, we're old fogies, but also we have some geek cred, you know, we're cool. And kind of getting students to, like you said, Eddy, to kind of humanize this, and like, you're not just criminal justice professors. Y'all actually play games and read comic books. You're actually real people. And of course, you know, at a small school like Texas Wesleyan, that's our bread and butter. That's what we depend on, those personal engagement opportunities with students to help, you know, develop mentor relationships and to help guide them through the, criminal justice students, the really tough challenges that they're gonna face in the world. So, although a lot of our stuff is really, really serious business, it is so important to humanize ourselves and to talk about fun things in class as well to kind of get that balance.
Well, and I think that also just to add to that, I mean, if you're having attendance issues, this is a great way to handle it. I mean, they want to come to class because of these conversations. I mean, it certainly has been beneficial. And it does open it up. I mean, in terms of like, we have students that are, well, students in general are going through some pretty tough times right now. And it by humanizing yourself in this manner, it also opens it up so that they can come and talk to you, which is I think a gold mine for them and for retention issues.
Mm-hmm. And also the escapism aspect of this, especially during the pandemic. Like for real, over the last 2 years, I've probably spent more hours gaming than I had like in the previous 4 or 5 years, just because of the downtime that you have kind of being, stuck at home by yourself. So I think a lot of students can kind of identify with that, being kind of socially isolated. So you're turning to escapism, but also one of the great things about, kind of modern video games is the online element. That's something me and my friends did that I couldn't kind of see during the pandemic. We would have game nights where we'd all, get on PlayStation and play golf, or Wreckfest, which is a demolition derby game, games that are real kind of easy for beginners to pick up and play. And we'd set up our iPads and FaceTime each other while we played. And during the worst days of the pandemic, oh my gosh, that's a lifesaver, just being able to connect with people and have fun. Goodness gracious, life should be fun. It shouldn't be all gloom and doom all the time.
Did you see Matthew's comment in here? And then the students ask what an arcade is.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, Eddie. You'll have to keep me up to date on the topic. I've got the presentation screen in front of me. I can't see it.
I love it. And when you have that conversation about Pong, when they think, "What? You played a game?"
Pong? You mean like table tennis? Yeah. And just to let y'all know, Texas Wesleyan has a national championship table tennis team. So I don't want to cast any aspersions on the table tennis because they're awesome. But yeah,
never call it ping pong. Never
call it ping pong. Yeah.
So
here's the GTA effect, kind of in a nutshell. And using I think Grand Theft Auto because of its popularity. I don't know if y'all heard, but there's rumors that they just released an announcement that their Grand Theft Auto 6 is in development. I haven't played all the GTA games, but I definitely played San Andreas and the first couple of them on the original PlayStation 2 when those came out. But kind of looking at the themes that you find in these games, it provides a theoretical framework for looking at just kind of video game violence in general. And so we just kind of went through these games and the GTA games and kind of identify these themes so that we can apply them to and analyze other games through that lens. So here are the 5 aspects of the GTA effect that we want to look at. Are video games rewarding violent, immoral, and antisocial behavior? Man, I'm not a neuroscientist, but I am totally fascinated with the implications of gaming from a neuroscience perspective. Like, our pleasure centers, our reward centers, just how motivated we can be to achieve and to find success, win trophies or gain accomplishments through video game playing. But as you can see in the screenshot, in Grand Theft Auto, man, like for real, you get rewarded for, being violent. And the more you get on the bad side of the law, the more you are running from the cops, the higher your score or the higher your rating gets in the game. So it is actually encouraging people to, role play antisocial behavior and violent behavior. And does that have an effect? Is that something that we can compartmentalize and separate? Is it just a game? Or does that kind of mind state and the neural connections we're making from playing these games, does that kind of follow us into the real world and affect our behavior? And that leads us to the desensitization of violence. One of my, kind of like one of those things where you're like, oh my gosh, I wish they had this when I was a kid. But, games like, Friday the 13th, where you have in the game itself as part of the game, incredibly violent and gruesome murder animations, when that's kind of the whole point of playing the game, because you want to unlock these animations. But is there a consequence to that? Is being exposed to, gore and gruesomeness and violence, does that desensitize us? And then, of course, the challenge of, are we glorifying criminal value systems? Are we encouraging people to kind of embody a thug mentality and think that that's cool? And again, like with games like Grand Theft Auto, you're encouraged to identify with a protagonist who is, if not an immoral character, highly amoral. And so does that play a role? And of course, the objectification of sexuality, not just female sexuality or male sexuality, but gender fluidity as well. What kind of messages are being sent, and how might that be shaping, people's attitudes about gender and sexual fluidity? And then, and finally, of course, endorsing violence or negative attitudes towards law enforcement. If you're the good guy in the game, but you're against the cops, does that inspire us to kind of, we're already struggling. I mean, y'all know, we're already struggling in our world right now with a lot of major concerns about police brutality, racism in the criminal justice system. And are these video games just kind of pushing people over the edge in terms of making them really not have faith in the criminal justice system, or maybe actively perceive the criminal justice system as a bad thing? Like, the criminal justice system I'm not the bad guy. The criminal justice system is the bad guy. So what are the implications for this when you look at research? Do you have anything to throw in there, Eddie? I didn't want to just hog all the time.
No, you're doing fine.
Okay, cool. So we just kind of want to look at some kind of examples of the GTA effect, and to see if there's any kind of relevance to these ideas. So the three examples we're going to look at are violence and school shootings, slasher games, and then finally maybe looking at some more positive aspects of the potential of video games to actually contribute, positively in a socially beneficial way through criminal justice training. And as we're going to see, what usually pops into people's heads when you're talking about like criminal justice training and video game technology is virtual technology for learning how to shoot better. Or and while that is part of it, as we're going to see, there's a lot of exciting things going on right now in terms of advanced AI and creating what are called first-person talkers, where the AI of the game allows criminal justice professionals to learn how to interview and interrogate others, kind of like LA Noire, but of course more sophisticated than that as well. So yeah, I'm not sure how many of y'all are really familiar with the Columbine shooting, but it happened in 1999, and I was smack dab in the middle of grad school at Sam Houston State at the time, and it was a game changer. It was a game changer. It literally completely altered our societal perceptions of public safety and school safety. And unfortunately, we're still seeing that today. The number of school shootings over the last 20 years have increased, and especially in the last couple of years, we've seen an increase on that increase. So there's something going on in society, and of course, we start grasping for straws. When these terrible things are happening, we're trying to make sense out of them. We want to look for cause. We want to look for something that can reassure us that even if we can't stop this problem, we can understand it. And our efforts to stop it are based on our ability to understand the problem. And really, the first time that video games really got into the negative public eye was after Columbine, when it was discovered that both of the offenders in this case were really, really obsessed with the game Doom. And of course, most people who play, like how the surveys at the polls at the beginning, most people who play video games are not going to engage in violent behavior. But if you're taking a simplistic look at things and you see these kids did this terrible thing, and then they were also playing these video games, they kind of seem to have some similarities to going around and killing people in a closed-in environment like Doom does, then of course it might be natural for us to kind of assume, and maybe wrongfully assume, that there's a direct correlation between playing these video games and inspiring violent behavior. And it goes all the way to the top. I found this quote by President, Trump, right after the Stoneman Douglas shooting a couple of years ago. We must stop the glorification of violence in our society. This includes the gruesome and grisly video games that are now commonplace. It is too easy today for troubled youth to surround themselves with a culture that celebrates violence. This goes way back. The exact same kind of arguments were made in the 90s with hip hop music, NWA, Ice-T, groups that were kind of or music that was targeted as having a criminogenic effect. But that it goes back to the 1950s. Comic books were one of the first forms of popular culture to really have the critical eye of the public turned on it in the 1950s, in terms of, we're worried that this form of popular culture is really twisting and warping our kids. But when you actually look at the evidence, as we're going to see a couple of research studies, there doesn't seem to be a definitive correlation between people who are exposed to violence through video games or really any other form of popular culture, and it turning a law-abiding, healthy individual into a person that's capable of committing great violence. And this is just a kind of a summary of the research that has been done by on video games and violence. It really, I think this quote just kind of really summarizes from a social science perspective what the basic findings are that we see, that if you're psychologically healthy, if you're relatively well adjusted, then there's not going to be a criminogenic effect. However, we might want to be careful in terms of those who are exposed to violent forms of popular culture, including video games, that might have some pre-existing mental health issues, antisocial personality tendencies as well. So it's not unequivocal. It's not like we're saying like video games, there's no problem with them whatsoever. They might kind of encourage a little bit more aggression or as we're going to see in some of the studies, a little bit more childhood aggression, but there doesn't seem to be that direct link between video games and straight up violence. One of the recent studies that we ran across doing this presentation was published in the Journal of Economic Behavior and Organization, and it looked at the primary age group that we're kind of concerned about in terms of school shootings, the ages 8 to 18. The typical, I don't even want to use that word, but the kind of the average school shooter, a male in those age ranges. So that's a really good research subject to look at, the 8 to 18-year-old male, the group that's most likely to play violent video games, as well as the group that's most likely to have individuals that actually go on to do school violence. They looked at two different types of aggression, or two different types of violence: aggression against other people and destruction of things and property. And they found that there was no evidence that the boys' violence against other people increased after playing a violent video game. However, parents of children in the study did report that their children were more likely to break things after playing violent video games. They kind of talk about it from, I'd encourage y'all to look up the article yourself. I provided a link to it at the end of this that you are welcome to check out. They do talk about this in the article, that there is a certain amount of kind of normal child destructiveness, especially with boy children. Like they just seem to kind of like to push the boundaries and to kind of be aggressive and be destructive. So is it kind of like a chicken or the egg thing? Like what came first? Was it the violent video game that kind of makes the kids a little bit, play a little bit aggressive, or the kids just a little bit aggressive? One of the big challenges we've seen, I just read this article yesterday, is an increase in diagnoses of ADHD during the pandemic, and I kind of noticed a similarity there. Like, is kid aggression due to the media they're consuming, or is it due to being in situations where they're frustrated? Many of us who have played video games can identify with the feeling of having your objectives or your goals blocked, like you die, or you don't achieve an objective in a game, and being so frustrated and so angry that you throw the controller or break something. So is it the video game violence in the game that's causing the violence, or is it just that we get frustrated when we're playing games and we don't win? As well. Eddie, did you have something?
Yeah, this might be an area where we talk also and open it up for discussion about, like,
Yeah.
you and I had talked about how the games have changed just in the time that you and I have been playing, where, like,
Yeah.
if you recall back then, you had 3 lives, you die, you have to start the game completely over. Now, you pick up right from where you left off. So have we lost that? Yeah, is there something that's lost in that game, the way the games are now coming out and the way the games have changed? I open this to the panel, to the group. What do you guys think?
Anybody want to throw in the hat there? No
So
pressure.
the question, so the question then is it significant? Is it how we play these games? If games are a reflection of our lives, then is it significant that in old games you had 3 lives, you died, you started the game all over, so there was some sort of consequence, there was some sort of process that you went through.
Yeah.
Versus now, where you just pick up and you start off right away from where you left off. There's no loss. There's no anything. I mean, you can actually take your character to where you. Sorry, I lost my pen. You can actually take your character to where you died, and there's a little marker sometimes that and you just collect your goods there. Does that matter?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I didn't see any research on that aspect of it. So I mean,
right.
That's science, y'all. When you see an unexplored territory, or for Trekkies out there, an undiscovered country, that's what science does. It tries to kind of fill that gap. The results of this study very similar to what we've been talking about. That the results just did not suggest that violent video games, really cause violence. They may kind of agitate and frustrate, but in terms of that is a long hop, skip, and a jump away from actual violent behavior. And of course, the author of the study points that out. Like that's the violence we're really concerned about, like interpersonal violence. And video games really don't seem to play a role in contributing to that type of violent behavior. Number 2 on the list, slasher games. Mentioned Jason Voorhees. Yeah. It's interesting because you actually see kind of this subgenre of games like the Friday the 13th, another game that we're going to talk about briefly, Dead by Daylight, where the players, you can play as the survivors, right? But you can also play as the villain. You can also play as the slasher. And is that blurring some lines in terms of our desensitization to violence? Killer role play, you're playing the role of this killer. On the one hand, you could argue that it's just kind of a harmless, healthy, cathartic thing. You play a first-person shooter, or you play a slasher video game, and yeah, you're killing video game characters, but they're video game characters, and you've got frustrations and stress in your life, and that just kind of lets you take it out on, in a healthy way, take it out on digital characters where you're not actually doing that in real life. Or does it lead to what we call violent ideation, which is continually exposing yourself to violence? Does it kind of lead you to start fantasizing about actually carrying those things out? One of my areas of expertise is serial murder and serial violence. And one of the things we know about those types of offenders, very similar to school shooters as well, is that they tend to have a very rich and varied fantasy life. Because of their social ostracism, they're really awkward and they start kind of feeling socially isolated. And they go into their own private worlds and they just start fantasizing. And if you feel kind of put out by society, humiliated, unfairly judged, then you can understand why a young person might start kind of gravitating towards thoughts of revenge, thoughts of putting people in their place, thoughts of expressing control and power where they feel they have none. And these characters in slasher video games are kind of like the ultimate symbol of the ultimate metaphor of power and control. They are in control, and they also can't be killed. What kind of what a seductive fantasy that is for disaffected young people. Moral ambiguity. What's right and wrong? If you're playing the role of the killer, a killer like Jason Voorhees, for example, whose origin is that he was once a victim himself. Is there some confusing messages about how we deal with adversity and how we deal with our own victimization and how we should deal with those things? This next thing is something that Eddy and I are really fascinated by, dark psychology. I don't know what it is, man, but our criminal justice classes fill up. And it's not just because students want to be criminal justice majors and go out in the world. That's a big part of it. But a big part of it, honestly, is something Eddy and I can relate to from a young age, which is fascination with violence, fascination with horror. There seems to be something very normal and very natural about our curiosity about dark and disturbing things. It's even been argued, like from an evolutionary perspective, that human fascination with these things is actually a survival mechanism, that the more fascinated we are with violence and destruction, the more we learn about those things, so we can kind of prevent those things from happening to ourselves, or help make sense out of the senseless, so to speak. So I think there is something to that as well, as that these games kind of tie into our fascination with violence, in maybe healthy and maybe not so healthy ways sometimes. And then finally, horror icons. The fact that, we have killers who are kind of celebrated. In fact, we know their names, Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Ghostface from Scream, and our young people and kind of encouraged to emulate that. And so those are some of the questions that slasher games bring up when we're talking about the relationship between video games and violence and crime. Oh man, one of my favorite games that came out on the PlayStation, Until Dawn, moral decision making, where and we're going to see how this might have some positive applications in criminal justice, but putting characters in hypothetical simulations where they're having to make moral decisions, where the writers of the video games, the creators, have allowed for branching storylines, so that if you make this decision with this character, it's going to have a consequence as you go through the game. And of course, a big aspect of that is replayability, so you can play the same game and make different decisions and see how it turns out when you make different decisions. But it adds this element of that you're in control of the destinies of these characters, and the decisions that you make have life or death consequences, which is straight up criminal justice. Criminal justice professionals, they carry that burden with them, the burden of having to make decisions that affect people's lives, from, of course, shooting decisions in the field, to the decision to pull the trigger, but also less violent decisions, like things like, should we convict this person, or should we let this person out on parole? What should we do? What should we do? Mentioned Dead by Daylight. Dead by Daylight has add-ons that you can purchase, and one of the Dead by Daylight is again, is kind of a slasher game where you can take the role of the killer trying to kill the survivors, or you can take the role of the survivors trying to take down the killer. But they have these add-ons they're tied to different franchises. So they, of course, what y'all see here is Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But they have like Stranger Things, Freddy Krueger, different kind of horror icons out there that you can play those characters in the game. But the reason I bring up the Leatherface and Texas Chainsaw is because recently there's been online controversy to the point where they've had to remove certain rewards that players can earn through the game, these downloadable skins that you can change the appearance of your character. And one of the biggest complaints is the use of the Claudette character, Leatherface. She's a female character, African-American character in the game. And as part of the reward of killing as Leatherface, you can cut off the person's face and wear it as your own. And essentially what this has led to online was so many instances of harassment of Black players by people wearing the Claudette mask as Leatherface, that the developer, due to this in-game harassment, actually is removing that reward, and they are, I guess, funding those that have already purchased that download with credits that they can use to buy other things in the game. This also leads to a really big problem that's going on now, which is trolling in the online community, where you have harassment. The anonymity of the online community. We don't go by our real names. We don't go by our real faces, and anonymity can create this I guess, feelings of kind of invulnerability and lack of consequence for our behavior. And so people that in the real world would never go up to somebody and say something derogatory to their face feel a lot safer, for lack of a better word, to do that in the online environment, which is something that we need to study. What else did you want to add at this point, Eddie?
I think we're doing well. I'm reading the comments as we go along, so we'll catch those at the end.
Yeah, what's that? What everybody's saying?
So far, we've got someone saying that that they have never wanted to commit a murder as a result of a video game. Until Dawn was amazing. A lot of people wanting to who have not read that or have not played that rather wanting to play it, and then the killer backstories in Dead by Daylight. Interest in the killer backstories.
Yeah. I mean, you get to the point where we're celebrating these characters. And you know, what does that say about human nature? You know, what does that say about society? You know.
And then this one I thought was particularly interesting. I think that the game doesn't let the player lose anything, but now newer games have a more intelligent AI where now you have to rethink and do everything different, which is, you know, yeah.
Man, just a quick aside, like, oh my gosh, I've never been more frustrated in my whole life playing a video game, playing XCOM 2, because because you die so much. It's so hard. But yeah, I totally get that. You know, yeah, you can save, you can go back to a save spot, but how many of us, you know, gamers have had that experience of like, you're just getting ready to beat the boss, or you're just getting ready to get to the save point, and then you die and you have to go all
the way back.
Yeah. And then you just suck it up and you do it, because that's part of the reward. Is you got to kind of, you know, we call it grinding. You know, you just kind of got to grind it out. You level up your characters. You know, maybe that's the problem. You didn't level up your character before you try to take on that boss. Yeah. So I think most of us can probably identify with that. So finally, you know, talking about criminal justice training, you know, with virtual reality and artificial intelligence, increasingly cost effective. You know, the technology has really decreased in expense over the last 20 or 30 years, but also the technology has improved and evolved so that it becomes more and more real life. And of course, there are downsides to that. I mean, if we're training people to shoot, you know, a lot of times it kind of goes unspoken that we're training people to kill. And yeah, they're killing in the line of duty, or it's a good shooting. And sometimes you have, you know, self-defense, and you have to protect people, and that's just part of the job. But is there anything kind of lost, or do we kind of become dehumanized if we're training to kill people? I think that's a legitimate concern when it comes to virtual reality and artificial intelligence simulation training. There are positive aspects of this. Research suggests that muscle memory and hand-eye coordination, you know, neural connections that video games help us to develop, that these skills can be improved through the playing of video games. Critical incident decision making, you know, with the virtual reality shooting simulations that law enforcement officers train with, you know, are you pulling the trigger as you're aiming at a suspect versus, you know, a law-abiding citizen? Because these things are coming at you real speed in real life. You know, somebody points at you, are they holding a gun, or are they holding a wallet? You know, are these things that we can, through muscle memory and habituation and training, train out mistakes? And of course, because it's the human element, there are always going to be the potential for mistakes. And I also want to make the point here that we're not talking about, you know, police corruption or bad shootings or racially motivated, you know, killings and things of that nature. You know, I'm really just talking about, you know, good shootings, and how can we make, you know, it's even awkward to say good shooting, but how can we make sure that these human beings, just like us, they're people too, these police officers and other criminal justice professionals out in the field, how can we make sure that we've provided them every resource available so that when those incredibly tragic situations happen, that they happen in ways that are legally justified? Also, conflict resolution and de-escalation. Y'all, this is critical. You know, the role that the police officer plays in de-escalation and at the very least not escalating a situation can lead to life-saving outcomes. And so the development of first-person talkers, or AI, that allows us to talk to a computer character that is mimicking a real-world suspect or a real-world witness that has been programmed to respond based on thousands of, you know, data collected from thousands and thousands of interviews of how people kind of respond to certain interview questions in certain contexts, Can we develop AI that allows people to develop people skills? I'm not a cop. Eddy has long, practitioner experience, but I don't have practitioner experience. So I really rely on people like Eddy and other active criminal justice professionals to kind of let me know what they think about what's going on in the field and how can we better serve them as academics and things like that. And I was having a conversation with a homicide detective one time, and I was asking them, a lot of our students really want to be homicide detectives. What advice would you give them? And his answer really surprised me. His answer was, you got to be a people person. You got to be a people person, which makes sense. Once after we talked about it, it totally made sense. Like, your job is to get information from people. And in order to get information from people, you have to make people feel comfortable in your presence, regardless of who that person is or where they come from, what their belief systems are, what their socioeconomic status is, what their attitudes towards police and the criminal justice system are. You have to make them feel comfortable to give information. So using AI to develop people skills can help us de-escalate and resolve conflict. And of course, we talked about use of force, like the actual firing of a weapon and the consequences that come from that. It's not perfect. Virtual reality is not perfect because it's not the real environment. And so you might not have that same physiological response, the fight or flight response that you actually get in a true firefight. But the more realistic we can make the simulations, the more we can engage the limbic system and the fight or flight response to approach, if not achieve, but to approach realistic shooting environments. So to give law enforcement officers in training muscle memory and habituation to the proper use of force. And then another thing at the end of the list here is stress inoculation and resilience. Using AI technology to prepare and virtual reality technology to prepare criminal justice professionals in the field to deal with the stressful and life-threatening events that they go through. And we call this stress inoculation. It's the same idea of getting a vaccination to keep you from getting sick, but we're inoculating you against the potential negative aspects of stress. And as we see, criminal justice professionals have it rough. They have it rough. They suffer from higher rates of suicide, higher rates of divorce, higher rates of domestic violence in their relationships, alcohol and drug abuse, cardiovascular disease, immunocompromised disease like rheumatoid arthritis. These jobs, they chew us up from the inside out. And so what can we benefit from in terms of virtual reality and AI training that allows people to develop coping mechanisms and coping skills for dealing with stressful situations? And how can they resilience is a new field that's looking at how we bounce back from stress and not taking for granted that stress is necessarily a bad thing. How can we use stress to grow? How can we use stress to learn? And can we kind of integrate our traumatic and stressful experiences so that we learn from them and we grow from them and we evolve in positive ways? Those of you that have played LA Noire, it's simplistic. It's video game, right? It's simplistic, but it's the same idea that as you're engaging the AI, you are responding to the AI's responses to your questions. So you're looking at body language, you're looking at verbal cues, not just the words that they use, but the tone of voice, intonation, inflection, those kind of things. And you're trying to get information out of people. So using these advanced forms of AI and a simulation of a first-person talker can improve interrogation and interview techniques. So to kind of sum everything up, and it looks like, we do have a few minutes. I was hoping we'd have some time to just kind of talk and kind of chat. But to kind of sum everything up, video games don't seem to have a direct causal relationship to crime and violence. They do seem to have some relationship to aggressive behaviors and emotional agitation, but there just does not seem to be that direct correlation or direct causation between video games and violence. However, video games can contribute to aggression and antisocial behavior, especially with people with pre-existing mental health issues. And you could even throw in there the anonymity of the online environment and how that can kind of bring out the worst of us. It's kind of like, you might text something to somebody that you'd never say out loud, kind of thing, or you might put something in a chat that you never say out loud. And with that kind of online environment, it might actually kind of foster, antisocial behavior. And then video game simulation can improve muscle memory skills, decision making. We are just now, the last little thing here, we are just now scratching the surface on this. One of the themes of the sessions we've had today is how video games are kind of coming of age in terms of, studying them scientifically and seeing that there might be some positive benefits to video games, but it's really just the tip of the iceberg. We're really just beginning. And with the advent of increasingly immersive AI and virtual reality technology, we got to keep up with that. Social science research on technology tends to be kind of backwards. Like we tend to wait until the technology is already out there and we start to see that there's some issues before we start paying attention to what the potential problems might be and then studying them. So you're starting to see for the first time that our attention from a social science perspective, focusing on video games and their harmful and helpful aspects to them, that they're finally getting the scientific attention that they deserve. And hopefully within the next 20 or 30 years, the research that's being done now will add to our understanding. Research affects policy. It affects public opinion. So the more we can get these ideas out there through our research, the more we can, encourage the public to have thoughtful, intelligent, sophisticated discourse on the role that video games play in our world today.
And there are definitely some issues that are coming up that we can see. Gaming addictions, for instance, are certainly growing in number as we retreated into our homes. A lot of us did turn to games as a way to deal with that isolation. And then as VR has gotten better and less expensive, people are getting more involved into the VR games. And are we going to start seeing an increase in PTSD? Are we going to see issues like that developing amongst players? So there are a number of areas that we should be looking into and being proactive, as Dr. Adkinson was saying. So
I'm just going through everybody's comments. I'll finally get a chance to see them.
Well, let's go ahead and are you good with opening it at this point?
Yeah, let's talk about it. Yeah. Y'all have questions? What do y'all want to talk about? We're big time gamers, so I mean, you're among friends.
Yes, very much.
Retreated to the metaverse. Oh man,
that is true though.
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah. The scandal. Oh, I didn't even talk about that. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Fatality. Yeah. Again, it goes back to that pop culture thing. It's like people are just scared of popular culture. And I get it because it's powerful. The more popular it is, the more affecting it is, right? So, I get that, but that's the whole point of us having meetings like this and talking about this stuff, to kind of get the word out to the general public that it might be actually I can kind of sum it up like this, I always tell my students, resist the urge to seek simplistic solutions to complex problems. And I think this is pop culture is a complex thing, and how it mediates our understanding of crime and justice is a complex thing. So we should approach it from that perspective, that it is complex. Street Fighter.
What was the Mortal Kombat controversy? I don't remember hearing about that.
If I understand correctly, from what I remember, like violence, that it was the first video game that the fatalities were like ripping off people's heads.
Out. Yeah.
Yeah. Ripping off people. Yeah, it led to the ESRB. Sorry about that. Yeah, Wendi, good job.
Oh no, yeah. I hadn't heard about that. So just like the tipper sticker, they did a similar thing for video games. Okay, cool.
Yeah, ripping off somebody's head and their spinal column's still there and there's blood gushing out everywhere.
The new ones are even more violent, and my husband beats me every time because he knows the combos, so he just
that's what I was gonna say, is the combos. Like you actually had to invest in, like, if you didn't know the combos, like looking them up in gaming magazines, because this was kind of like the internet wasn't widely accessible at that point. Now you just kind of look up cheat codes on the internet, but I remember getting like Nintendo Power Magazine or whatever, and getting all the fatality combos, and then
left, right.
Trying to do each one.
I'm a button masher myself.
Yeah, me too. Those combos just wore me out. That's why I don't play Mortal Kombat.
It's funny that he kind of grew up playing that, and now like his main game is Stardew Valley. Like they couldn't be more different.
Oh, I totally forgot about Night Trap, man. The Sega CD. Oh my gosh, yeah, that starred Dana Plato from Different Strokes. She was in that. Yeah, that video game got a lot of negative attention because you're in this house and these stealthy people are trying to kill everybody. Yeah, their kids watch that. Night Trap. Yeah.
I mean,
That was
the
fun.
funny thing about that is that it was completely wrong. You weren't killing the people. You were trying to figure out who was threatening the teens. So
Yeah.
the way they portrayed it was completely not what the game. I mean, it's a terrible game objectively.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a good game. No one should go to bat for it. But the way that it was spun was completely wrong for what the game actually was.
I mean, that kind of proves our point. The non-critical consumption of these things, and not kind of willing to look deeper. And we see that, of course, going on in our society today with a variety of social problems. People just kind of getting overwhelmed and afraid of things and not looking deeply into like what's actually going on and what does it mean. And so that's kind of the message we're trying to get out, is at least be willing to kind of look more deeply into things before you rush to judgment. Night Trap. That what the mention of Night Trap, this was already a wonderful experience for me. I'm having the time of my life, but that was just the icing on the cake. I had no idea when I woke up this morning, I had no idea somebody would bring back that old nostalgia. Night Trap. Animal Crossing. I mean, it's been so. I played the GameCube version of that. I haven't played the most recent Switch kind of version. I'm not even sure kind of what's going on in there that could even remotely be considered violent. Okay, sure, systemically violent. I'll have to check that out. Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with werewolf. What is that? What's that reference from? The werewolf?
Oh, you were just saying that you didn't think you'd be talking about Night Trap, and when
Sure.
when I put werewolf in my slides, I didn't think anybody would have seen it before.
Oh, sure.
We needed to know more.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, I appreciate that. Oh man, yeah.
Wow.
Aliens and Predator, yeah. Yeah, and honestly, we didn't even get into like Call of Duty stuff. I mean, it was so hard to put this presentation together and just winnow things out, because there's just so much we could have thrown in there.
Alien Isolation, all these great games that are out there that we could talk about. Yeah.
In fact, you are making me want to take the rest of the day off and go play.
Yeah.
Yeah, I already looked up they have Myst Masterpiece, which is like a redo of the original Myst game, and I've already got it in my cart to play.
Yeah, it's tough, man, because I really struggle to kind of make time for I got a 6-year-old, man. I'm a dad, I really struggle to kind of find that time every day to play, and I find myself missing it, just in terms of that escape and that diversion. Yeah. Roblox. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh, my daughter is obsessed. Chip off the old blocks. Did y'all hear that? She's a chip off the old blocks. Waka waka.
Oh, dad humor.
I'm sorry. I apologize. See, y'all nice people, you invited me out here, and then I'm telling you these terrible jokes.
We knew what we were getting. We knew what we were signing up for.
Okay, great. I should get you signed up for it.
Well, let me know when you play the new Silent Hill Village, because everybody was losing their mind over Lady Dimitrescu.
Yeah.
Because I do like horror and gothic stuff. That's mainly where my stuff lies. So when you started talking about the slasher games and the true crime aspect of it and the horror, I was like, yes, that's my spot.
Yeah, and kind of leapfrogging off that true crime, I really appreciated the effort of LA Noire, and I'm 100%. I gotta play that Resident Evil Village game. But yeah, they kind of gave it a good faith attempt to simulate kind of criminal investigations and not just the interview and interrogation scenes, but actually like going to the crime scenes and collecting evidence off the body. And I'm just waiting for somebody to come out with like a truly like forensically accurate video game that I can play. Man, I'd love to like a game about hunting down serial killers. That's more reality based than it is like kind of exaggeration entertainment based. That'd be fantastic. I would love doing something like that. Yeah. Capture a real life serial killer, man. Awesome. Yeah, I got it down. I did see that the Resident Evil Village was 50% off. So I might have to invest. Yeah, y'all, thank y'all so much, man. We spend so much time like doing serious stuff. You know, and criminal justice is serious, and we constantly looking for ways to kind of bring joy and fun and lightheartedness in the classroom. In fact, that's something we try to do. Like for every time we talk about something real heavy and real serious, we try to flip it up and be okay. Let's talk about something lighthearted and fun. Yeah. Okay, Santa Fe, the Elk Moon murders. I'll check it out. Yeah, I'll check it out. I'm all for suggestions and recommendations. Oh yeah, you're welcome. I hope y'all had a good time. And you know, like everybody said, we're from Texas Wesleyan. Y'all are more than welcome to reach out to us. You know, our emails and stuff. I'll type my email here in case anybody wants to reach out. You know, you are welcome. You are always welcome. Students, faculty, and staff, y'all are always welcome to come to our campus and join in the fun. Our special topics classes are really, really exciting because we get to teach exactly what we love. You know, this semester I'm teaching pop culture and crime, and next fall I'm teaching superheroes and criminal justice mythology, which is, you know, I love superheroes as much as I love video games. So whatever we can do, and not just to engage students, but to be honest, man, like I don't like being bored. I like having fun and, you know, bringing things that I like to do and have fun and making them academically valid. Yeah.
Thank y'all very, very much. Had a great time.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for speaking. And this whole group was a lot of fun. So hopefully we can keep the party going. So we're going to take a break right now until 1 o'clock. And you can join us at 1 for Dr. Yolak's talk on critical and inclusive game design. That'll be another link that's located on our website. I put the link in the chat. And until then, have a good lunch break, and we'll see you back here at 1.
Thank you all so much. I'll be heading out. We're interviewing for a new criminal justice faculty position this afternoon, so I've got some interviews to do, but I would much rather have hung out with y'all.
Don't worry, we are going to record and send recordings to everybody who registered and presented. So yeah, you won't miss anything.
And expect a follow-up real quick from us because we definitely want to do some fun stuff in the future with you guys. This was awesome.
Heck yeah, this was so much fun.
All right, man. Y'all have a great time. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And y'all be super safe out there with the crazy weather.
Well, stay warm. Bye, y'all.
Yeah, y'all take care. Bye-bye.